All right, take a step back for a moment. Imagine standing on a high mountain, looking down at the entire history of human civilization. You'd see the grand empires of the past: Rome, Persia, Byzantium, the Mongol Empire, the British Empire, the Soviet Union, all of them like waves crashing on the shore. They rise, dominate, flourish, and then crumble into dust. Every single one. It's almost eerie, isn't it? No matter how powerful, enlightened, or advanced a society becomes, there's always an inevitable decline. But have you ever wondered why? Wars? Sure, they play a part. Greed? Definitely. Corruption? Without a doubt. But these are just symptoms of a much deeper, much more fundamental force. Beneath the surface of every historical collapse, there exists something constant, relentless, and quietly destructive. It does not discriminate by race, class, or culture. It doesn't care whether you are rich or poor, educated or illiterate. It exists in every government, every institution, every workplace, and even in our everyday interactions. What is this mysterious, unrelenting force that has shaped history more than any king, emperor, or revolution? It is ignorance in its purest form, an unshakable reality of human existence. No matter how much humanity advances, no matter how many books we write, discoveries we make, or lessons we claim to learn, ignorance remains a defining feature of history. It has caused more destruction, more suffering, and more setbacks than any other force in the world. And the worst part? We constantly underestimate it. We like to believe that ignorance is just a minor inconvenience, something we can brush off with a sarcastic joke or a clever remark. But no, my friend, it is far more than that. Ignorance is a silent destroyer of civilizations. It has ruined economies, started wars, toppled governments, and even held back scientific progress for centuries. And it's not just about other people. It's about you. It's about me. It's about the way we navigate life, the decisions we make, and the perspectives we adopt. Because whether we realize it or not, ignorance isn't just something that exists out there. It exists within us too. So now we come to the most important question of all. How does ignorance work? If we're going to survive, if we're going to be among the few who don't fall into its trap, then we need to understand its nature. Ignorance isn't random chaos. It follows specific patterns. It moves in predictable ways, much like a force of nature. And once you understand these patterns, you will never see the world the same way again. So let's get to it. Let's define the laws of ignorance and figure out how to protect ourselves from this invisible but immensely powerful force. Because history has shown us one thing: ignorance doesn't need a reason to destroy everything. It just does. And if we don't learn to recognize it, we'll be its next victims. Are you ready? Let's go. The first law of ignorance: the underestimation. Trap, if there is one universal mistake humanity makes over and over again, it's this: we always underestimate the power of ignorance. It doesn't matter if you're the smartest person in the room, a seasoned strategist, or a highly trained expert. At some point, you will overestimate the intelligence of others, and that will cost you. We like to believe that people are rational beings. We assume that when presented with facts, reason, and logic, they will make the right choice, or at least a choice that makes sense. But that's where we go wrong, because, my friend, ignorance does not follow logic. It does not obey reason. It does not require an explanation to exist. Why do we keep falling for this? Why do intelligent people, time and time again, assume that others will act rationally? The answer is simple: because intelligence comes with a flaw. It makes us believe that just because we can see things clearly, others will too. It's called the illusion of rationality, and it's one of the biggest blind spots in human thinking. You assume that because you wouldn't do something incredibly foolish, others wouldn't either. You assume that if there's an obviously better decision, people will take it. You assume that if you explain something clearly, people will understand. But here's the truth. Ignorance is not just a lack of information. It exists independently of knowledge, education, or experience. And the moment you think you can reason your way around it, you've already lost. Now, let's talk about how underestimating ignorance has literally destroyed civilizations. The Roman Empire, the one that dominated the world for centuries, collapsed not just because of external enemies, but because of poor decisions made within. Leaders ignored clear warnings. The economy was collapsing, but they kept making the same mistakes. Barbarian invasions were coming, but they fought among themselves instead of preparing. Fast forward to the 20th century, the Great Depression. The people in charge, some of the most educated minds of their time, ignored obvious economic risks. They assumed that people would act in their own best interest, that greed had limits, and that economic growth would continue indefinitely. They were wrong. And what followed was a financial collapse that plunged millions into poverty. Now, here's something even darker. When ignorance is combined with fear, manipulation, and power, it leads to some of the greatest atrocities in history. People watched destructive regimes rise, convinced that it couldn't really happen. Intellectuals and leaders assumed that propaganda wouldn't work because people were too smart for that. But history proved them wrong. Ignorance, when left unchecked, doesn't just harm individuals, it shapes the destiny of entire civilizations, and that's why the first law of ignorance is so crucial. Never assume that rationality will prevail on its own. The second law of ignorance, the unchanging constant if. The first law wasn't unsettling enough, buckle up, because this one is even worse. Ignorance is not just common, it is constant. It does not decrease with education. It does not fade with progress. It is as unshakable as gravity. Every society, every era, every civilization, no matter how advanced, has been plagued by the same proportion of ignorance. You might think, but we live in the most technologically advanced age in history. Surely, intelligence is winning. Oh, my friend, if anything, ignorance is thriving now more than ever. Technology doesn't eliminate ignorance, it amplifies it. The internet has put all human knowledge at our fingertips, yet misinformation spreads faster than ever. AI can make complex calculations, but people still fall for scams. We have instant access to facts, but absurd conspiracy theories continue to dominate discussions. Ignorance has found the perfect home in the digital age because now it can travel at the speed of light. Think about it. In the past, a bad idea could only spread as fast as a person could speak or write. But today, one false claim can reach millions in seconds. If history has taught us anything, it's this. Humanity doesn't become less ignorant. It just finds more creative ways to show it. How do we protect ourselves? You cannot eliminate ignorance, but you can learn to navigate around it. Recognize ignorance early. The faster you identify it, the faster you can move away. Do not argue with irrational people. You will waste time and energy. Surround yourself with intelligent minds. Create spaces where wisdom thrives. Never assume that progress means ignorance has disappeared. Stay vigilant, because at the end of the day, the only thing more dangerous than ignorance is failing to recognize it when it's right in front of you. And that, my friend, is the hard truth. Are you ready for the next law? Because trust me, this is just the beginning. Let's go deeper. You said, ChatGPT said, the third law of ignorance. The most dangerous people in the world, we've established two harsh realities. Ignorance is universally underestimated. First law. Ignorance is a constant force that does not fade with progress. Second law. Now we arrive at the most terrifying truth of them all. This is the law that ruins lives, destroys civilizations, and causes suffering on a scale unmatched by any other force in history. Let me hit you with a brutal truth. The most dangerous person is not the corrupt, not the criminal, not the tyrant. It is the irrational. Why? Because corrupt individuals, criminals, and tyrants have motives. They are driven by self-interest, money, power, control. Their actions, while destructive, follow a logic that can be understood, anticipated, and sometimes even countered. But an irrational person, they are dangerous because their actions have no logical pattern, no self-preserving strategy, no rational goal. They create destruction, not because they gain anything from it, but simply because they act without understanding. Consequences. If someone harms you for personal gain, at least you can prepare for it. That's just self-interest at work, even if it's unethical. But when someone harms you for no reason, without benefiting themselves, how do you fight that? The answer? You can't. Not with reason, not with negotiation, not with logic. This is what makes irrational ignorance the most chaotic, unpredictable, and dangerous force in the world. Most people assume that evil is the greatest danger. They fear criminals, corrupt politicians, and dictators. But here's the truth. A corrupt person steals from you. An irrational person burns down the entire house, including their own room. A corrupt politician will exploit the system for personal gain. An irrational politician will wreck the system for no clear reason. A ruthless warlord will wage war for territory and power. An irrational leader will start conflicts that lead to unnecessary suffering for everyone, including themselves. Con artists will scam you for financial gain. An irrational person will spread falsehoods and cause harm without even realizing it. And that's why ignorance, when combined with a lack of awareness, becomes the deadliest force of all. How ignorance has destroyed civilizations. History is filled with examples of entire nations suffering, not just from evil, but from reckless, irrational, short-sighted decisions. Take the 2008 financial crisis. The banks gave out bad loans that everyone knew would eventually collapse. Yet irrational decision-making prevailed. People acted as if reality wouldn't catch up to them. When the financial system crashed, nobody won, not the bankers, not the investors, not the average citizens. It was a disaster caused not just by greed, but by blindness to consequences. Take the fall of great empires. The Roman elite ignored every warning of decline, assuming that stability would last forever. The Ottoman Empire resisted modernization, dismissing the need for change until it was too late. The Soviet Union collapsed, under policies that made no economic sense, yet leaders clung to them for decades, believing reality would bend to ideology. And what about wars that should never have happened? Leaders ignored clear warning signs, dismissed rational diplomacy, and led millions to destruction, not out of strategy, but because they refused to acknowledge the reality of their own errors. The pattern is clear. The most destructive mistakes in history have been made not by the malicious, but by the blind, the reckless, the irrational. How do we counter the dangers of ignorance? If we can't reason with ignorance, how do we defend ourselves against it? Avoid irrational people whenever possible. They will drag you into their chaos. You cannot negotiate with a force that doesn't recognize consequences. Do not waste energy trying to fix ignorance. You won't succeed unless the individual is open to learning. Some people are trapped in their own misconceptions, and nothing will change them. Identify patterns of irrationality in leadership. The worst disasters come from foolish leaders making decisions that harm everyone, including themselves. The sooner you recognize these patterns, the sooner you can prepare. Watch for collective irrationality. Mass movements, groupthink, and hysteria often overpower individual reason. When you see an entire society moving in a destructive direction, step back and reassess before following the crowd. Stay self-aware. The worst ignorance is the one we don't recognize in ourselves. Always challenge your own assumptions, question your own beliefs, and stay open to learning. Because the truth is, you cannot fight ignorance directly, but you can protect yourself from it, and those who fail to recognize this, they are the ones who suffer the most. The fourth law of ignorance. Why it keeps winning. Now that we understand ignorance, we must ask, why do societies allow it to thrive? Why does it hold so much power despite its destructive nature? Here's the uncomfortable answer. Ignorance is loud. Intelligence is quiet. Throughout history, the least competent people have often held the most influence, not because they are wise, but because they are unafraid to act without hesitation. Smart. People analyze before making decisions. Ignorant people charge forward without doubt. And in a world where confidence often matters more than competence, guess who gets the attention? That's why the loudest, most reckless individuals often rise to power, because they don't hesitate, they don't overthink, and they don't doubt themselves. Meanwhile, intelligent individuals who could actually improve society spend so much time questioning and refining their ideas that they are often overshadowed. This is how ignorance infects institutions, governments, and entire civilizations. It follows a pattern. People mistake loud confidence for wisdom. Irrational decisions spread like wildfire. By the time intelligent people realize the danger, the damage is already done. That's why history repeats itself. That's why preventable disasters aren't prevented. That's why civilizations crumble, not because nobody saw the warning signs, but because too many people ignored them. How do we break the cycle? We may not be able to eliminate ignorance, but we can counter its influence. Do not mistake confidence for intelligence. Just because someone speaks with certainty does not mean they are right. Question popular movements and trends. The majority is often wrong, especially when decisions are made emotionally rather than logically. Seek wisdom over noise. Loud voices do not equal great ideas. The most profound truths are often found in careful reflection, not in mass hysteria. Strengthen the influence of intelligence. Support systems, institutions, and leadership that prioritize logic and wisdom over impulsiveness. Stay vigilant. Ignorance wins when people assume they are safe from it. Never stop learning, questioning, and preparing, because here's the hard truth. Ignorance will always exist. It will always find a way to spread. It will always seek power. But those who recognize its nature, those who see the patterns, those who refuse to be dragged down by it, they are the ones who survive. And that, my friend, is the key difference between those who rise and those who fall. Now, are you ready for the final law of ignorance? Because trust me, this is where it gets truly terrifying. Let's go deeper. The fifth law of ignorance, the most dangerous type of person. We've uncovered 4 brutal truths. Ignorance is underestimated. Ignorance is a constant force that does not fade with progress. The most dangerous people are not the corrupt, but the irrational. Ignorance keeps winning because it is loud, confident, and relentless. Now we arrive at the final, most unsettling truth. The most destructive individuals are not the ones who simply make mistakes. They are the ones who do harm without even realizing it. This is the ultimate danger of ignorance. It does not just affect individuals, it spreads, infects, and reshapes societies. And the most destructive people? They are the ones who unknowingly bring ruin upon themselves and others. Let me explain. If someone steals from you, deceives you, or manipulates you, at least there is an intent, something you can anticipate, counter, or defend against. But when someone harms you without even understanding that they are doing it, what defense do you have? That's why irrational ignorance is far more dangerous than malice. Because a corrupt individual still acts with some level of calculation, but the truly ignorant, they destroy everything, including themselves, without a second thought. Consider a reckless leader who ignores economic realities, leading to financial disaster. Consider a scientist who disregards safety warnings, causing unintended catastrophe. Consider a policymaker who implements a law without understanding its consequences, hurting the very people they intended to help. In each case, the destruction is not caused by intentional malice. It is caused by blind confidence in one's own false understanding, and that is the defining characteristic of the most dangerous type of person. They do not know how little they actually know. One of the greatest ironies of history is that ignorance does not just destroy societies, it eventually destroys itself. The problem is that before it collapses, it takes everything else down with it. The leaders of declining empires refuse to see reality until their nations fall. The economists of failing financial systems believe they can manipulate the numbers until markets crash. The overconfident decision-makers assume their actions will work even as they make problems worse. By the time reality catches up to them, the damage is already done. Ignorance does not correct itself until it has already caused collapse. And that's why ignorance is never just a personal flaw, it's a societal threat. Now, if there's one mistake that rational people make over and over again, it's this. They assume ignorance will correct itself. It won't. If history has taught us anything, it's that ignorance left unchecked always leads to collapse. Because ignorance does not fix itself. It does not wake up one day and realize its own errors. It only stops when it has run out of things to destroy. So the question is, what do we do about it? How do we protect ourselves? Since ignorance is an unavoidable force, survival depends on learning how to navigate it. Recognize ignorance before it becomes dangerous. The earlier you identify irrational decision-making, the easier it is to avoid its consequences. Stay alert for patterns of self-deception, blind confidence, and reckless behavior. Do not waste energy trying to reason with ignorance. You cannot argue with someone who does not understand why they are wrong. If someone refuses to learn, move on. Focus your efforts where they will actually make a difference. Avoid institutions and systems infected with ignorance. Once ignorance takes control of an organization, it becomes nearly impossible to fix from within. If you see irrational leadership taking over, get out before it collapses. Surround yourself with rational minds. Ignorance spreads, but so does intelligence. The more you engage with logical, thoughtful people, the stronger your ability to resist ignorance. Keep your own ignorance in check. No one is immune to blind spots. The moment you assume you are completely free of ignorance is the moment you start making mistakes. Stay open to learning, questioning, and reevaluating your own beliefs, because ultimately, the only true defense against ignorance is awareness. The final truth: you can't stop ignorance, but you can survive it. If you've made it this far, you now understand the brutal reality of ignorance. It is everywhere. It never fades. It is louder than wisdom. It destroys without intention. So where does that leave us? Are we doomed? Not necessarily. Yes, ignorance is eternal. But intelligence is a choice. You cannot stop ignorance from existing, but you can refuse to let it dictate your life. You cannot eliminate stupidity, but you can navigate around it. You cannot force people to see reality, but you can make sure you see it clearly yourself. And that is the ultimate survival skill in an age where ignorance is louder than ever. Do not fight ignorance directly. It will only consume you. Instead, recognize it, outmaneuver it, and rise above it. Because, my friend, intelligence may be rare, but it is powerful. And those who understand the nature of ignorance, they are the ones who survive. Now that you understand the 5 laws of ignorance, what will you do with this knowledge? Will you fall into the same traps that history has warned us about? Or will you be among the few who see the patterns, adapt, and stay ahead of the collapse? The choice is yours. But remember this: ignorance is always waiting. The question is, will you be ready for it? When you quietly disappear, not out of anger or revenge, but simply because you choose to, people won't miss you. They'll miss the version of you they created in their minds. The hero, the villain, the person they projected their own fears onto. They say distance is just space, but really, it's a sharp edge that cuts through every lie they've told themselves about who you were. Your absence doesn't leave a hole. It forces the truth to surface. Without you there's no one left to blame, No one left to twist into their own story. And that silence you leave behind? It's not empty, it's loud. It forces them to look in the mirror, to face the reality they've been avoiding. Because when you walk away, you're not taking anything from them, you're just making them finally see themselves. Think about it. How many times have you been told you're important, that they need you, that they couldn't do this or that without you? But deep down, isn't it curious how those words always seem to be more about them than about you? When you distance yourself, you shatter that illusion, and then they begin to feel something they can't explain. It's discomfort, it's anger, it's guilt, it's fear. But most of all, it's a question they don't dare to ask. What's left of me if you're no longer there? It's unsettling, isn't it, to think that someone might depend on you not out of love, not out of a genuine connection, but because you are the support for something they don't want to face in themselves? And yet, that is the reality of many human relationships. We are mirrors, but we are also crutches. When you decide to let go, when you decide to step away, you force others to wobble, to face a truth they were trying to ignore. Their emotionals, dependence wasn't on you, but on the idea of you. And then comes the real mystery. What do they actually feel when you're no longer there? Some will say sadness, others disappointment. Some might even fill themselves with resentment. But the truth is, they don't know because the void you leave has no shape. It's not a pain they can identify. It's not a wound they can heal. It's something more visceral, more primal. It's the echo of what they never wanted to admit. What goes on in their minds when you decide to leave? What shadows do you awaken in them? And more importantly, why does that decision to step away seem to hold so much power? Why does it create so much noise in their souls? Today, we're not going to talk about the easy stuff. We're not staying on the surface. We're going to explore what really happens when you decide to step away, what others feel, what they don't dare to say, what they try to hide, and above all, why that act, which seems so simple, has the ability to lay bare the darkest corners of their psychology. Get ready, because this won't be a comfortable journey. There are no easy answers here, no truths that won't make you uneasy. This is a journey into the depths of human emotions, into the zones most prefer to avoid. But if you're here, it's because something within you already knows stepping away doesn't just transform your life. It shakes the world of those who don't know how to exist without you. And that's the real mystery we're going to unravel. When you decide to step away, something curious happens. People start to reconstruct a narrative about you. But that narrative isn't about who you really are. It's about who you were in their lives and, more importantly, about what they lose with your absence. It's as if they try to fill the void with versions of you that you don't even recognize. They begin to interpret you, analyze you from afar, looking for signs, patterns, anything to help them explain your decision. But here's the trick. What they're really seeking isn't to understand you, but to justify themselves. Your absence forces them to confront a question they never wanted to ask. How much of my emotional stability depended on this person? And that question, for many, is unbearable. Because in their quest to project strength, independence, and self-sufficiency, they are forced to acknowledge something deeply human, but also deeply uncomfortable. They depended on you more than they were willing to admit. And you know what happens next? They start to transform their perception of you, not because you've changed, but because they need to construct a version of your departure that's bearable for them. Some idealize you as if your absence makes you more valuable than you already were. Others, on the other hand, demonize you. They convince themselves that your leaving was a selfish act, even a betrayal, because deep down, it's easier to blame you than to admit that your decision destabilized them. The fascinating part is how these emotions don't emerge uniformly. People react in completely different ways depending on what you represented in their lives. For some, your absence is like an open wound, For others, it's a wound they thought was healed, but that your distance reopens. And for a few, it's a mirror that reflects their greatest fear, being alone with themselves. This is where the real complexity lies. It's not just that others react, it's how those reactions change over time. At first, there may be anger or confusion, but as time passes, the absence becomes much more abstract. They begin to wonder if they really knew you or if they were merely projecting onto you what they wanted to see. And that doubt is what can consume them. Because your departure isn't just physical, it's symbolic. It represents a change in a dynamic they didn't control, and loss of control always generates anxiety. You know what's most ironic? That many times, people don't even understand why your decision affects them so much. In their minds, you weren't that crucial. You didn't occupy such a big place. But your departure reveals that you occupied more space than they were willing to admit. It's as if your absence illuminates the cracks in their emotional structure, the ones they always tried to hide. And what they feel isn't about you, it's about what your distance forces them to confront. There's something profoundly unsettling about how your stepping away can become a trial by fire for the relationships you leave behind. Often, your absence lays bare an uncomfortable truth that many human connections aren't based on unconditional love or mutual respect, but on convenience, power dynamics, and unspoken needs. And when you decide to break those dynamics, people don't just lose a person, they lose a support system, a point of reference, a balance that you unknowingly helped maintain. So here comes the question no one wants to ask. What's left of them when you're no longer there? For some, the answer is simple. They move on, find other connections, adapt their lives to your absence. But for others, your departure leaves a void they don't know how to fill because your presence unwittingly had become the anchor for something much bigger, something that starts to crumble without you. And the most fascinating part is how, in the end, this experience of stepping away impacts both sides. It's not just that they feel your absence, you also feel the consequences of your decision. But that's another story. Today we're focusing on them, on what your departure triggers in their minds, their hearts, their lives. And believe me, that impact is much deeper than it seems on the surface. When you decide to step away, you don't just initiate a change in others' lives. You also become a catalyst for emotions they didn't even know they had. It's curious, but your absence is like a silent thunderclap. It doesn't make noise at first, but it leaves the ground trembling beneath their feet. In that moment, even if they don't say it, even if they don't admit it, an internal process begins that they themselves can't stop. The initial reaction is usually denial. They're busy. It's just temporary. They'll come back. They convince themselves that your absence doesn't mean anything, that it's fleeting. But while they try to cling to that idea, something begins to unsettle them. Deep down, they know something has changed, and that uncertainty, that why without an answer, becomes a seed of doubt that grows slowly. Did they do something wrong? Were they too demanding? Did they fail to value you enough? The questions invade them, and with them comes anxiety. But there's something even more fascinating. Your departure forces them to recalibrate their identity. Because when you spend time with someone, your energy, your presence intertwines with theirs. You become a part of their life, even if it was never something explicit. So when you step away, they don't just lose your presence, they lose a part of who they were with you. And rebuilding that part isn't easy. Suddenly, they have to figure out who they are without you. And here's where something almost poetic happens. They start to remember you, but not as you really were, but as they need to remember you. Each person creates a version of you that fits their narrative, their pain, their understanding of why you're no longer there. Some idealize you, thinking you were so perfect, so necessary, and they didn't know how to value you. Others demonize you, believing you only left because they never really cared. And a few, the bravest, face the truth. maybe I never understood what they needed. It's at this point that the intrigue reaches its peak, because while they wrestle with their emotions, you, from a distance, become an enigma. They wonder what you're doing, what you're thinking if you miss them, and that uncertainty is like a loose thread they can't stop pulling. But what truly unsettles them isn't the lack of answers, it's the lack of control, because by stepping away, you broke a pattern, and broken patterns always create chaos. You know what's the irony of all this? That while they rebuild their world without you, you're also going through your own process. Because the act of stepping away isn't simple, it's not just taking physical or emotional distance. It's an act of courage. It's looking in the mirror and saying, I need space for myself, even if it means others won't understand. And that, though necessary, can be terrifying. And here's where I want to pause for a moment. Because if you've read this far, I know something about this resonates with you. Maybe you've stepped away from someone. Maybe you've felt something crumble around you because of your decision. Or maybe on the contrary, someone stepped away from you and you're trying to understand why. Whatever your situation, I invite you to reflect. How much of your inner peace depends on others, and how much are you willing to let go to find that peace? I want you to leave a comment with this phrase: the void doesn't define me, it frees me. Write it if you feel this message has touched you, if you've seen yourself reflected in any part of these words, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, because here we talk about the things others avoid, the topics that make us uncomfortable but transform us. If you want to keep exploring the depths of the human mind, this is your place. But don't leave yet. We're not done. Because there's one more thing I want you to understand. Your decision to step away, while painful for some, can also be the start of their own growth. Because sometimes the best way to help someone isn't by staying, but by showing them they can move forward on their own. And that, even if they don't see it at first, might be the greatest gift you give them. So stay until the end, because what comes next isn't just a reflection, it's a revelation, one that could change the way you see your relationships, your decisions, and above all, yourself. Do you really enjoy the things you think you enjoy? Every time you pick up your phone and scroll without thinking, every time you open another tab to look at something that deep down doesn't even interest you, every time you eat when you're not hungry, laugh without feeling joy, or consume things you don't need, ask yourself, who is really enjoying this? Is it you, or is it the system that trained you to chase quick pleasure? Here's the harsh truth. You've been programmed to chase pleasure but never to actually find it. And the worst part? You didn't even notice. We live in a time where pleasure is always within reach, but why does it never feel like enough? Aldous Huxley saw this coming almost 100 years ago. He warned us that real control wouldn't come through forcing people, but through giving them pleasure. It wouldn't be through fear, but through distractions. A world where there's no need to ban books because people stop reading on their own. A world where the truth isn't hidden because it's buried under piles of nonsense. A world where people don't need to be controlled because they're too busy being addicted to their own habits. And here we are, living in Huxley's world, the world where every desire is satisfied in seconds, where satisfaction is instant but emptiness grows, where pleasure isn't a reward anymore, but a drug. That's what they've done to pleasure. They've turned it into a way to control you. Do you think you're free just because you can choose what to consume? But who's really choosing when every option is designed to trap you? Look around. Notice all the things fighting for your attention. Every notification, every sound, every bright color. It's all a trick disguised as fun. Quick pleasure is the new boss. They don't punish you, they entertain you, they don't hold you back, they keep you busy, they don't lock you up, they give you so many choices that you end up stuck. And so people get lost chasing small pleasures while their real lives fall apart. It's an addiction, and like any addiction, It's not about the pleasure itself, but about getting the next hit. Food isn't food anymore. It's dopamine in the form of sugar and fat. Social media isn't connection. It's fake validation. The content you watch isn't learning. It's mental numbing. They've sold us the lie that pleasure is the goal. But what if it's actually poison? Aldous Huxley made it clear the future wouldn't be about forcing people, but about distracting them. And here's the real issue. Every little bit of cheap pleasure makes it harder for you to feel real pleasure. Kids can't focus on a book anymore, but they can spend hours watching 5-second videos. Adults can't stand silence, but they can fill every moment with meaningless noise. Relationships fall apart because effort doesn't seem worth it when instant gratification is just a click away. Easy pleasure ruins your ability to fight for what really matters, because the best things in life are the ones that take the most effort. The problem isn't pleasure itself, the problem is how easy it is to get. Think about it. Why has love become disposable? Because there are endless options. Why do people stop chasing big dreams? Because instant gratification is easier to find. Why do you never feel completely satisfied? Because quick pleasure doesn't fill the hole inside you. And that's how pleasure becomes a weapon. It keeps you distracted while your life slips away. It keeps you addicted while you lose the ability to feel real pleasure. It keeps you stuck chasing something that will never come. Pleasure isn't the problem. It's the cost you pay for it. The question is, are you okay with paying that price? But the biggest trap isn't being addicted to pleasure. It's believing you need it. They've taught us that happiness means enjoyment, but no one taught us how to handle boredom. No one prepared us for the empty moments. No one explained that real life, the kind worth living, isn't a series of exciting moments, but a bunch of struggles. They sold us the idea that everything should be fun, easy, and pleasurable. Now, whenever we face something hard, we think something's wrong. If studying isn't fun, we quit. If a relationship has problems, we throw it away. If a project takes effort without a quick reward, we put it off. The modern world has trained you to be impatient, to think discomfort is a mistake, to run from the emptiness instead of understanding it. And what's the result? A society full of people who can't handle even the smallest frustration. People who need constant stimulation to avoid their own thoughts. People who fill every quiet moment with noise. People who mix up comfort with happiness and end up more miserable than ever. Here's the big paradox. The easier it is to get pleasure, the harder it is to be happy. The brain isn't built to live in constant reward mode. When everything is pleasurable, nothing feels special. When everything happens right away, nothing has value. When everything is easy, life loses its meaning. And yet, here we are needing more and more. The next video, the next message, the next thing to distract us. Just to forget for a second that we feel empty inside. But here's the worst part. They're not just stealing your happiness, they're stealing your ability to think. A mind hooked on pleasure can't ask questions, and that, when it comes to controlling society, is the ultimate trick. They keep us entertained so we don't notice what they're taking from us. Do you remember when you could focus on something for hours without feeling the urge to check your phone? Do you remember when you could be bored without freaking out? Do you remember when your attention wasn't split into 1,000 pieces? All of that was programmed to disappear. Every app, every social network, every entertainment platform was designed to mess with your brain, to make you unable to focus, to train you to react to impulses instead of thinking, to turn you into a passive consumer instead of someone who creates. Because a person who can't focus can't learn. A person who can't handle boredom can't reflect. A person who can't think clearly can't ask questions. And that's the final goal. You don't need a strict government when you have a population that's entertained. You don't need censorship when people stop caring about asking questions. You don't need chains when people lock themselves in cages made of cheap pleasure. Aldous Huxley said it plainly. The love of being controlled will be our destiny. But it won't be forced control, it'll be chosen control, a kind of slavery dressed up as freedom. Want to know how they pull it off? Through overload. They've convinced us that freedom means having lots of choices, but when they give you endless options, they're actually taking away your power. You pick from 1,000 shows, but none of them satisfy you. You choose from 1,000 songs, but you can't fully enjoy any of them. You meet 1,000 people with flaws, but each relationship feels shallower than the last. You think you have more choices, but really, you just have more distractions. And when everything is shallow, fast, and replaceable, nothing really matters. That's the trap. A society focused on pleasure doesn't make you freer. It makes you weaker. The more used you are to chasing quick pleasure, the less able you are to handle discomfort. And discomfort is what helps you grow. There's no success without effort, no love without sacrifice, no purpose without pain. But the modern world doesn't want you to grow, it wants you to consume. Because a person who faces challenges gets stronger. A person who handles discomfort becomes independent. A person who can wait for rewards becomes dangerous, because they no longer need the cheap pleasures the system offers. And here's the big question. Are you still in charge of your mind, or have you become a slave to pleasure? The first step to taking back your freedom isn't putting down your phone. It's not deleting an app. It's not avoiding temptations. It's realizing that pleasure isn't the problem. It's how you relate to it. If you can manage your craving for quick pleasure, you can take control of your life. If you can resist instant rewards, you can build something meaningful. If you can handle boredom, you can start thinking for real. Pleasure isn't the enemy. The enemy is the weakness it creates when you don't know how to use it. So the next time you feel the urge to look for another distraction, ask yourself, who's in charge here? If you can control your craving for quick pleasure, you can control your life. If you can resist instant rewards, you can build something meaningful. If you can handle boredom, you can start thinking for real. Pleasure isn't the enemy. Play's enemy is the weakness it creates when you don't know how to use it. So the next time you feel the urge to look for another distraction, ask yourself, who's in charge here? Because if it's not you, then someone else is. And that, my friend, is the worst kind of slavery. Now that you know this, the question isn't whether you'll keep falling into the trap. The question is, what are you going to do with this information? Because here's the scariest part. The pleasure that controls you now won't go away. Just because you understand it, your brain has already been trained, your patience has already been destroyed, your attention has already been shattered, and if you don't do something about it, you'll end up like everyone else. Because that's the system's greatest trick. It makes you think that understanding the problem is the same as solving it. It's not. Knowledge without action is just another distraction. So tell me, are you going to close this video and go on with your life like nothing happened? Or are you going to take control? I'm not telling you to become a monk. I'm not telling you to live without pleasure. What I'm saying is to develop the most important skill there is, self-control. The ability to decide when to stop, when to say no, when to break the cycle before it's too late. Because if you don't learn to master pleasure, pleasure will master you. And here's something no one tells you. The people who succeed in life, the ones who build something bigger than themselves, the ones who leave a mark, the ones who live with purpose, they're not the most talented, the smartest, or the luckiest. They're the ones who learn to delay quick pleasure, to resist the temptation of the easy path, to handle the discomfort of doing the hard work. And those people aren't born that way. They build themselves every day by making choices others won't make, saying no to things others can't refuse, mastering the art of doing what needs to be done instead of what feels good in the moment. So here's the challenge. The next time you feel the urge to chase quick pleasure, stop for just a second. Feel the impulse. Notice it. Recognize it for what it is, a chain they've put on your mind. Then decide. Decide if you really want to give in or if you want to take back your power. Because in every small decision, in every moment where you choose the hard thing over the easy one, you're training your brain to be in charge. And if you start today, if you keep doing this over and over, if you break the pattern, one day you'll wake up and realize something. You're not like everyone else. You don't need constant approval. You don't need instant rewards. You don't need chains disguised as pleasure, because you belong to yourself. And when that happens, when you take back control, the system no longer has power over you. Pleasure stops being a drug and becomes what it was always supposed to be. A reward, not a prison. So tell me, will you stay a slave to pleasure, or will you do what few dare to do? Leave a comment. Write, "I take control." Because if you can write it, if you can commit to it publicly, you've already taken the first step. And if this video made you think, if it woke something up inside you, subscribe. Because here, I won't give you easy pleasure. I'll give you reality. And reality, even if it hurts, is the only way to be truly free. What would you do if you discovered that the answers you've been searching for aren't out there in the external world, but are hidden deep within you? It's like an incomplete map. Our mind holds secrets in hidden layers, waiting patiently for the right moment to reveal what truly matters. Carl Jung, the renowned psychologist, once said that the greatest secret of the psyche lies in what we avoid confronting. Think about it. How many times have you felt an inexplicable restlessness, as if something were lurking beneath the surface, trying to get your attention? It's not a loud voice screaming at you, but rather a subtle movement, hard to ignore, yet easy to overlook. Today, we're going to explore that movement. A psychic awakening is more than just a fleeting moment of clarity. It's like unraveling a mystery that involves both what you already know and what you don't yet fully understand about yourself. We'll delve into dreams delivering coded messages, shadows reflecting what we deny, and synchronicities crossing our paths at just the right moments. This isn't about belief or faith, it's about noticing how all of these elements exist in our daily lives, quietly waiting to be understood. More than theories or abstract ideas, this is an invitation to recognize and integrate what the mind is trying to show us every single day. Have you ever felt that restlessness, as if something inside you is trying to be heard? Maybe it happened in the silence of an ordinary night, or perhaps during a hectic day when, out of nowhere, you felt like something was missing, but you couldn't quite pinpoint what. That feeling, that subtle pull, is the door, one that opens to the unknown, inviting you to step through. The beginning of any personal transformation often feels like this, a discomfort that can no longer be ignored. Joseph Campbell, a scholar of mythology and universal symbols, described this as the call to adventure. He dedicated his life to exploring stories from different cultures and identified a pattern he called the hero's journey. This cycle begins when the protagonist is called to leave their familiar routine to face challenges that ultimately transform them. And if you think about it, isn't that what we often feel when something bigger than our daily routine starts pulling us? This call doesn't have to be a grand, dramatic event. Often, it appears in seemingly mundane moments, the exhaustion of a job that no longer makes sense, the end of a relationship, or even a persistent feeling of emptiness. Situations like these act as sparks, unsettling our comfort zones and pushing us to ask deeper questions. What do I really want? Who am I beyond the expectations I carry? Awakening isn't a manual with clear instructions, but rather a dive into what we offer and what we avoid. It's like opening a creaky door to reveal a dark room. At first, it might feel frightening, but the more you explore, the more you realize that this space holds essential parts of who you are. This call is for everyone. It doesn't always arrive with clarity. Sometimes it's just a discomfort, a restlessness that drives you to seek something new. The question is, are you willing to listen? Because ignoring it is easy, but doing so only delays the inevitable, the moment when you'll need to look in the mirror and ask yourself, why do I keep avoiding what's inside me? Dreams are like letters sent by the unconscious, written in a mysterious language filled with symbols that don't always make sense at first glance. Yet they carry truths that our conscious minds haven't yet grasped. Have you ever stopped to think about what your dreams are trying to tell you? Carl Jung, a psychiatrist and one of the leading figures in analytical psychology, believed that dreams were bridges to the unconscious, a way to access aspects of ourselves that we avoid or don't yet understand. But here's an important detail. Dreams don't speak our everyday language. They are like abstract paintings, full of images that require careful interpretation. For instance, have you ever dreamed of falling? It's one of the most common dreams, and its interpretation can vary. For some, falling might symbolize losing control or fearing something beyond their grasp. But it's not a fixed rule. The meaning depends on the dreamer, the context, and how the sensation connects to their life. Dreams don't lie, but they do require effort to decode. Imagine receiving an incomplete map. It points out paths, but it's up to you to figure out how to use it to get somewhere. That's how dreams work. They bring messages about our desires, fears, and even opportunities for growth, but they only make sense when we look at them closely. What if the symbols in dreams were messages about what we need to face in our lives? A wild animal might represent your own suppressed anger. A dark room could symbolize a secret you're trying to hide from yourself. Often, what appears in dreams is what we're unable to express during the day. They are at once confusing and revealing. What makes dreams so fascinating is that they never cease to surprise us. Even when we don't immediately understand them, they continue working silently, showing us what we can't see, and perhaps that's what makes them so valuable. No matter how much we ignore what's hidden, it always finds a way to surface, even if it's while we sleep. Have you noticed how easy it is to point out in others the things that bother us? An irritating habit, a behavior we judge inappropriate, or even a way of being that seems to provoke us on purpose. What if I told you that often what we see in others is just a reflection of what we reject in ourselves? Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves that we don't accept, don't understand, or simply prefer to ignore. Imagine the shadow as a locked chest in the basement of the mind, where we hide what we don't want to show the world. Fears, insecurities, repressed impulses. The problem is that ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. On the contrary, it finds ways to manifest itself, especially in our relationships. Think of a time when someone irritated you because of something you also do or fear doing deep down. For example, someone who constantly criticizes others for being arrogant might, without realizing it, be struggling with their own tendency to feel superior. It's uncomfortable to admit, but these projections are like mirrors reflecting what we'd rather keep hidden. Not confronting the shadow is like allowing a hidden fire to slowly consume the structure of a house. Ignoring it isn't a solution. It's merely postponing the inevitable, which comes at a greater cost over time. Facing the shadow, however, isn't about judging or punishing yourself. It's about accepting that we all have imperfect parts, and that's okay. For example, someone who rejects their anger might notice it erupting uncontrollably at the worst moments. But by confronting this emotion, they might discover that anger carries an important message. Perhaps it's tied to boundaries that haven't been respected or to a need for change. The shadow, after all, isn't just a repository of weaknesses. It also holds the potential to transform us. What do you see in others that you might be hiding in yourself? This question can be uncomfortable, but reflecting on it can lead to great insight. Because when we face what we've been avoiding, we begin to find a path to acceptance, not just of what is good, but of what is real. How many times have you experienced coincidences that felt too meaningful to be mere chance? Like thinking of someone and suddenly they call you, or finding an unexpected solution to a problem just when you need it most. These are synchronicities, moments when it feels like the universe is whispering directly to you. Carl Jung, who coined the term synchronicity, described these experiences as meaningful coincidences connecting external events to our internal state. He believed these events reflect a link between what we feel and what the world mirrors back to us. A famous example comes from his clinical practice when a patient was recounting a dream about a golden scarab. At that very moment, Jung heard a light tapping at the window, and upon opening it, he found a beetle resembling the one from her dream. To him, this coincidence marked a turning point in her treatment, as it reinforced a critical aspect of her inner work. But are these synchronicities really messages, or are they just a way of finding meaning in chaos? It's a fair question. Still, it's hard to ignore how these events often occur at crucial moments, like lighthouses in the darkness, illuminating the next step. Think of a time when you were uncertain about a decision, and suddenly something small, a conversation, a song, or even a forgotten object, helped clarify your path. At the same time, it's important to remember that synchronicities are guides, not destinations. Obsessing over them can lead to imbalance, like seeking signs for everything and losing the ability to act independently. They should be treated as tools, not definitive answers. As Jung warned, the universe can reflect our desires and doubts, but the responsibility to interpret and decide lies solely with us. Is it just coincidence, or is it an alignment between what you feel and what the world reflects? That's the question. Because in the end, synchronicities remind us of something fundamental. We are connected to everything around us in ways we don't always understand. Recognizing them means embracing the fact that life is often more complex and more fascinating than we can predict. Psychic awakening, while captivating, is not a straightforward or risk-free journey. Often, what begins as a search for understanding can turn into a heavy burden. It's like building a house on a mountaintop without a solid foundation. No matter how tall or impressive it is, one strong wind can bring it all crashing down. One of the most common risks in this process is isolation. As someone dives deeper into spiritual practices or self-discovery, it's easy to become disconnected from the world. Endless meditations, constant reading on the subject, or even striving for emotional perfection can create a bubble. While the person may feel above worldly distractions, they might actually be distancing themselves from meaningful and necessary connections. Another pitfall is the obsession with light, trying to stay positive and enlightened all the time. The truth is, awakening isn't just about ascending, it's also about descending into the things we avoid. You can't escape your shadow without confronting its challenges. Someone clinging only to higher experiences might suppress essential emotions like anger or sadness, or overlook basic needs, and this will eventually take its toll. Think about cases of spiritual burnout. Someone might overdo meditation or self-discovery exercises to the point of neglecting their body, relationships, or mental health. Instead of finding balance, they end up overwhelmed, like a bird trying to fly too high without realizing its wings are wearing out. Awakening isn't about escaping who we are. It's about integrating every part of ourselves, and integration requires balance. What happens when we ignore essential aspects of who we are? It's like playing an out-of-tune instrument. Even if the melody is right, something will still feel off. That's why grounding your awakening in practical, everyday life is so important. The psychic journey can be deep, but it needs roots. Without them, what should set you free can end up trapping you instead. As we follow the path of self-discovery or spiritual practices, another subtle yet common danger emerges: the spiritual ego. It might sound contradictory. How can something meant to connect us to our essence actually fuel the ego? But that's exactly what happens when spirituality becomes another way to feel superior to others. Carl Jung warned about the risks of an inflated ego during the awakening process. This happens when someone uses their inner progress as a status symbol, Think of the person who believes they're on a higher level because they meditate daily, follow a strict diet, or avoid behaviors they consider less evolved. Instead of humility and connection, judgment creeps in toward others and anything that doesn't fit their idea of perfection. The problem with spiritual ego is that it disconnects us from the essence of what awakening truly means. Instead of fostering growth, it creates a mask of superiority. For example, someone who practices yoga or meditation might begin to look down on others who don't follow the same lifestyle, treating spirituality as a badge of nobility rather than a path of personal transformation. What does it really mean to be awakened? Is it about feeling superior to others or being at peace with yourself? The answer can be uncomfortable because spiritual ego often hides in plain sight. It masquerades as progress, but at its core, it's just another way of shielding ourselves from vulnerabilities that remain unintegrated. As Jung once said, the goal of individuation is to free the man from the false shell of the persona. But it should not be understood as a quest for perfection, rather as the full development of the individual. In other words, true awakening is a path of humility, not glory. Recognizing this requires honesty and a critical examination of our intentions. After all, genuine spirituality doesn't divide but connects. It doesn't elevate some above others, but reminds us that at our core, we all share the same contradictions and potential. We are both light and shadow. It's a truth as simple as it is unsettling. Yet many of us spend our lives trying to be only good, ignoring or suppressing the parts of ourselves we find unacceptable. But what happens when we reject such an essential part of who we are? It doesn't disappear. It simply hides, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Carl Jung believed this duality is unavoidable and that trying to suppress the shadow only leads to greater imbalance. He famously said, "There is no light without shadow and no wholeness without imperfection." This means that accepting the shadow doesn't mean resigning ourselves to darkness. It means recognizing that it's part of the whole. We are like day and night. One cannot exist without the other. Think about emotions like anger or sadness, which we're often taught to avoid or suppress. A common example is someone who strives to be always kind, suppressing any signs of dissatisfaction. Over time, this person might accumulate so much frustration that an outburst becomes inevitable. It's like trying to hold down a balloon while continuing to fill it with air. Eventually, it bursts. Accepting the shadow, however, doesn't mean being controlled by it. It's about understanding that within every emotion or impulse we consider negative, there's something to be learned. Anger, for instance, might reveal where our boundaries are being crossed. Sadness could be an invitation to slow down and reflect on what truly matters. The balance lies in realizing that we are not one or the other, but both. To live authentically, we need to integrate these parts of ourselves rather than fight against them. Accepting the shadow doesn't mean becoming dark, it means becoming whole. So, the question remains, what part of yourself are you rejecting out? A fear of not being accepted by others? Accepting duality is the first step, but the true challenge lies in integrating it into who we are. What does it really mean to become whole? Imagine a puzzle with scattered pieces, where each piece tells a story. Some you're proud to show, while others you prefer to hide. The work of integration is about bringing all those pieces together, even the difficult ones, to see the full picture. Carl Jung called this process individuation, an ongoing journey of self-awareness and acceptance, where we move beyond just living through our social mask or persona and connect with our true essence. He never claimed it was easy. After all, who enjoys facing their own mistakes, insecurities, or fears? But ignoring them means living an incomplete life, as if parts of yourself are always left on the sidelines. Think about moments when you've learned something important about yourself. Maybe it was after a mistake that taught you about boundaries, or perhaps it was realizing that even your flaws can be assets depending on how you use them. A practical example, someone who sees themselves as stubborn might discover through integration that they're also resilient and determined. This work happens in the small moments of daily life. It's forgiving yourself when something goes wrong, recognizing your flaws without condemning yourself, and celebrating your strengths without inflating your ego. It's understanding that you don't need to be perfect, just honest with yourself. Because in the end, you don't need to become someone else. You just need to become who you already are. Like pieces of a puzzle, the process is rarely linear. Some parts fall into place quickly, while others take time. But every step forward brings you closer to something more authentic. As Jung said, what you most need is found where you least want to look. Perhaps the missing piece lies precisely in the part you've been avoiding. Psychic awakening isn't a straight line with a clear endpoint. Instead, it's more like a spiral where each turn takes you deeper into yourself. As you progress, you revisit familiar places but with new perspectives and lessons. What seemed clear at first might change, and what once felt confusing might finally make sense. This process has no shortcuts nor a definitive destination. Often when we think we've arrived, life presents a new challenge, asking us to face something we hadn't yet noticed. This isn't failure, it's the very nature of awakening. Jung famously said, "What we deny in ourselves controls us. What we accept frees us." Yet this freedom isn't static. It's a continuous cycle of learning and transformation. Think about patterns that seem to repeat in your life. Maybe you've faced recurring relationship issues, insecurities, or personal dilemmas that keep coming back. The goal isn't to avoid these cycles, but to notice how you approach them differently each time. With every turn of the spiral, you carry the lessons you've already learned, even if the challenge feels the same. Awakening is just that, a dance between light and shadow, progress and pause, acceptance and change. It's not about reaching the top of a mountain, but learning from each step of the climb, and sometimes the descent. It's a living movement where the end of one cycle is merely the beginning of another. Are you ready to accept that awakening isn't a destination to be reached, but a state to be lived? Because in the end, it's not about completing this movement, but about allowing yourself to grow, change, and integrate every part of who you are. And perhaps this is the greatest truth of awakening. It has no end because evolution is infinite. Psychic awakening isn't about finding ready-made answers or achieving a final state of perfection. It's a continuous process full of twists and turns, light and shadow, learning and revisiting. It happens in the small details of daily life, in the questions we ask ourselves, the dreams that intrigue us, and the moments that challenge us to look beyond the surface. It isn't something reserved for a few, but a journey we are all connected to in different ways throughout life. The most important part of this path is understanding that it doesn't require speed or perfection. As we've seen, true transformation happens when we integrate all parts of ourselves, the ones we admire and the ones we avoid. It's like rebuilding an internal map, connecting points that once seemed unrelated, and in doing so, seeing who we truly are. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you. Reflecting on topics as deep and personal as this isn't easy, but your willingness to think about it is already a significant step. And remember, no one walks this path alone. We're all dealing with our own light and shadow, trying to find balance in a process that is never the same for everyone. Now, I want to leave you with one last thought. What inside you still needs to be heard? Sometimes the answers lie in the simplest things, in the dream that keeps lingering in your mind, in what bothers you most about others, or even in the coincidences that cross your path. Don't ignore these signs. They might be the starting point for something you didn't even realize you needed to understand. The journey of awakening, if we can call it that, never truly ends. Each cycle brings new challenges, but also new possibilities. So, keep exploring, reflecting, and accepting, because true awakening isn't about solving everything, but about allowing yourself to fully be who you are, with all your nuances. If this message resonated with you in any way, share your thoughts. Let's keep this conversation going. And once again, thank you for being here. May the balance between your light and shadow always be the compass in your search. Until next time. Everywhere you go, seriously, has the planet been overtaken by an unholy alliance of obnoxious managers, passive-aggressive co-workers, and soul-sucking frenemies? If not, then why does it feel like every corner of your existence is occupied by people who seem genetically engineered to make life utterly miserable? Maybe it's just your office, or perhaps it's your in-laws, or even that random stranger who insists on blaring their terrible music in a public space. But trust me, the jerks are there. And thankfully, Robert I. Sutton has handed us the ultimate survival manual for dealing with them. It's sharp, unapologetic, and most importantly, effective. Welcome to the Maitaistam Survival Guide, a book so necessary it feels like a scream into the void. Finally, someone has answered the call. 4:47 a.m., deep in a YouTube rabbit hole watching videos titled My Horrible Boss Storytime and How to Spot a Narcissist in the Wild. I wasn't looking for solutions. I was marinating in shared misery. But then, as I scrolled through the comments section, often the digital coliseum of modern humanity, I saw someone mention this book. Sutton's guide literally saved my mental health, they wrote, like a prophet whispering from the noise. One frantic ebook download later, and there I was, consuming it like an AI devours data. With obsessive glee, Sutton doesn't wag his finger at jerks. He turns the spotlight on their behaviors, their impact, and, thankfully, how to outmaneuver them like a chess grandmaster in the game of workplace survival. Let me introduce the brilliant mind behind this masterpiece, Robert Sutton, a Stanford professor whose official titles sound like he was assembled in a lab specifically to dismantle workplace toxicity. With a doctorate in organizational psychology and a resume filled with acclaimed books like The No Sauce, Rule and Scaling Up Excellence, Sutton is like the Gandalf of workplace dynamics. He's not some armchair academic either. His work digs deep into the trenches of office life, revealing how jerks disrupt performance, damage morale, and spread their toxicity like a plague. Sutton's blend of research-backed insights and biting humor makes him feel like the professor you wish had taught you everything about life, not just management. So, what exactly makes someone a jerk? Sutton defines them as those who consistently make others feel demeaned, degraded, or downtrodden. Think of that coworker who publicly berates everyone for tiny mistakes, or the manager who treats your workload like their personal dumping ground. But here's the twist. What you find insufferable in someone might barely register as annoying to another. Jerks don't come in cookie-cutter forms. Their behaviors range from blatantly abusive to subtly toxic. Sutton encourages you to tune into your own thresholds, because identifying jerk behavior is the first step to reclaiming your power. But let's not pretend it's easy. Distinguishing between a jerk and someone having a bad day can feel like solving a murder mystery. Sutton also breaks jerks into archetypes, and, oh, does this list hit home? You've got the classic kiss-up, kick-down type who charms their superiors while crushing their peers. Then there's the overly assertive spotlight hog, bulldozing meetings to impose their half-baked ideas. Don't forget the gaslighters who twist reality and erode your confidence piece by piece. Credit stealers and micromanagers round out the rogues gallery, ensuring there's no shortage of ways to have your day ruined. If you're thinking of someone right now, congratulations. You've just met one of Sutton's jerks. Each type is like a specific weapon in a toxic arsenal designed to disrupt harmony and maintain their warped version of control. Sutton doesn't just categorize them, he exposes their strategies, making their behaviors harder to excuse or ignore. By shining a light on their tactics, Sutton empowers us to see through their manipulations and take back control of our environments. Let's talk about the different types of jerks you might encounter in your life. Sutton doesn't just stop at labeling them. He dives deep into their behaviors, exposing how they operate like weapons in a toxic arsenal designed to disrupt harmony and maintain their warped sense of control. For instance, there are the credit stealers, those who take your hard work and pass it off as their own, leaving you feeling undervalued and frustrated. Then, there are the micromanagers hovering over every detail of your work, making you feel like you're incapable of doing anything right. Don't forget the gaslighters who twist reality to make you question your own sanity, eroding your confidence, piece by piece. These individuals, along with others, round out what Sutton calls the rogues gallery, ensuring there's no shortage of ways for your day to be utterly ruined. If you're thinking of someone right now, congratulations. You've just met one of Sutton's jerks. Each type of jerk is like a specific weapon in a toxic arsenal, carefully crafted to disrupt harmony and assert their twisted version of control. Sutton doesn't just categorize these individuals, he exposes their strategies, making it harder for us to excuse or ignore their behavior. By understanding their tactics, we can better protect ourselves from their harmful impact. It's almost like Sutton hands us a magnifying glass, allowing us to see the intricate ways jerks manipulate situations to serve their own needs. Here's the thing about jerks, they don't just mess with your mood, they mess with your entire life. Sutton dives headfirst into the aftermath of their behavior, showing us that their toxic ripples extend far beyond snarky comments or a bad day at work. Jerks create real, tangible damage, and it spreads faster than office gossip. Chronic exposure to their antics can crank up your blood pressure, wreck your sleep, and push your stress levels into the stratosphere. Let's not sugarcoat it. These people can literally shave years off your life. Studies back this up, connecting jerk-induced stress to serious health issues like heart disease and brain fog. Think of it as secondhand toxicity. Even if you're not their direct target, their negativity can seep into the workplace culture like a slow-acting poison, affecting everyone around them. It's not just about you, though. Sutton lays out how jerks corrode entire workplaces, creating environments where morale nosedives and productivity flatlines. They encourage absenteeism and turn once creative teams into disheartened silos. Worse, their behavior is contagious. One bad apple doesn't just spoil the bunch, it breeds more bad apples. Sutton calls out organizations that let jerks thrive, pointing out that a single toxic personality can set off a chain reaction of negativity. The results? Higher turnover, plummeting engagement, and a culture where everyone's just trying to survive, not thrive. You've probably seen it yourself. Teams where everyone's too exhausted or demoralized to care. That's the jerk effect. Fully realized. Now, not every jerk deserves your attention. Sutton introduces a system for deciding whether to act or let it go. Context is king, he insists. Is the behavior a one-off slip, or is it part of a pattern of psychological warfare? Everyone has bad days, even you, human, but repeat offenders are the real culprits here. Then there's the question of power. Is this jerk your boss or someone whose opinion doesn't matter? Finally, consider the collateral damage. If one outburst has shaken your confidence for months, it might be time to address it, even if it was a one-time thing. This is where Sutton shines. He doesn't just vent about jerks. He gives you a roadmap for dealing with them strategically. You're not here to fight every battle, just the ones worth winning. But what if the jerks are everywhere? Sutton talks about workplaces where toxic behavior isn't just tolerated, it's the norm. Imagine a team where micromanaging is seen as attention to detail, or backstabbing is excused as healthy competition. These aren't just bad apples, these are entire trees of rot. When jerk behavior becomes the culture, it infects everyone. Sutton pulls no punches here, calling out companies and leaders who allow this festering environment, essentially turning jerks into workplace supervillains. Yet even in these hellscapes, he provides tools for survival. You might not be able to reform the entire organization, but you can carve out your own pocket of sanity and avoid getting sucked into the chaos. So, what's the escape plan? Sutton's first strategy is simple, but not always easy. Leave. Get out of the jerk's orbit altogether. Switch teams, change departments, or walk away from the company if you must. Sure, it sounds drastic, but sometimes self-preservation demands bold moves. Sutton doesn't sugarcoat it. Leaving is often the cleanest way to protect your mental health. He also warns against forming new connections with known jerks. Pay attention during interviews, client meetings, or networking events. Red flags are there if you look. Listen to how people talk about their colleagues. Are they dismissive or arrogant? If someone's a jerk to others, it's only a matter of time before you're in their crosshairs. This advice isn't just about avoiding drama. It's about saving yourself from a slow, grinding erosion of your peace. Not all battles with jerks can be fought on the outside. Sometimes the battlefield is in your mind. Sutton's mental defense mechanisms center on the concept of cognitive reframing, a fancy way of saying change how you think about it, and you'll change how you feel about it. Instead of seeing the jerk's behavior as a personal attack, try reframing it as a reflection of their own insecurities or failures. Did they belittle your ideas in a meeting? That's on them, not you. Reframing isn't about denial or toxic positivity. It's about taking control of your narrative. So, you're no longer at the mercy of their actions. Science backs this up. Your brain's wiring can shift when you consistently reinterpret negative events in a healthier light. And guess what? This isn't just a defense, it's a weapon. When you refuse to let their toxicity stick to you, you rob them of their power. Here's a twist you might not see coming. Empathy. Yes, Sutton suggests that understanding your enemy, humanizing them even, can be a game changer. Empathy doesn't mean condoning bad behavior, it means recognizing that jerks are often driven by their own demons. Maybe they grew up in a household where aggression was survival, or maybe they're cracking under pressure from a toxic boss above them. When you see their humanity, it can help you let go of your resentment and reclaim your peace. Forgiveness, Sutton argues, is less about absolving the jerk and more about freeing yourself from the grip of anger. Forgive them not because they deserve it, but because you do. Studies even show that forgiveness lowers stress and improves mental health. It's like flipping the script. When you empathize, you take back control of the narrative and break the vast cycle of negativity. But let's get real. Some jerks need a more direct approach. Sutton doesn't shy away from teaching the art of retaliation, but it's not the reckless vengeance you might imagine. This is about strategic, calculated moves that expose their behavior without stooping to their level. First, gather evidence. Every snide comment, every hostile email. Document it like you're preparing a legal case. Then, find allies who can corroborate your experiences. A lone complaint is easy to dismiss, but a collective voice is not. Finally, know your power dynamics. If they're above you in the hierarchy, you'll need to tread carefully, possibly involving higher-ups or HR. Sutton's point is clear. Retaliation isn't about escalating conflict, but about creating consequences for behavior that thrives on unchecked freedom. Fight smart, not dirty. If retaliation feels too heavy-handed, Sutton offers another tool, humor. Imagine deflecting a jerk's snide comment, not with anger, but with a sharp, witty comeback that leaves them fumbling. Humor disarms them, shifting the power dynamic in your favor. Sarcasm can be your secret weapon if wielded carefully, But Sutton warns against taking it too far. Humor should sting, not wound, and it works best when the jerk's behavior is so egregious that calling it out publicly becomes a shared joke. Imagine someone stealing credit for your idea in a meeting, and you respond with, "You're right, Bob. My idea does sound great when you say it." Laughter ensues, and suddenly the tables have turned. The key here is balance. Humor should expose the behavior, not incite retaliation. Here's the bottom line. Jerks are an inevitable part of life, but they don't have to own you. Sutton's guide isn't just about surviving them. It's about reclaiming your agency in spaces that often feel uncontrollable. Whether it's by walking away, reframing their impact, or confronting them head-on, you have tools. But Sutton's greatest gift is perspective, the realization that jerks only have the power you allow them. So here's your challenge. Start noticing the jerks in your orbit, but don't stop there. Call them out, hold them accountable, and protect the spaces where kindness, creativity, and collaboration can thrive. After all, if we let the jerks win, what does that say about us? Thanks for sticking with me through this wild ride. If you found this as enlightening and cathartic as I did, hit that like button and share your own jerk stories in the comments, because trust me, we all have them. Subscribe for more deep dives into the books, ideas, and tools that can make your life just a little bit better. Until next time, stay sharp, stay kind, and keep calling out the nonsense. What if I told you that everything you think you know about yourself is a lie? The persona you've crafted, the image you present to the world, and even the little white lies you tell to keep the peace, it's all a deception. And this deception is slowly poisoning you from the inside out. I stumbled across this insane rabbit hole while browsing through an obscure corner of the internet, a place where self-help meets philosophy in a head-on collision. The book Radical Honesty by Brad Blanton practically screamed at me from the screen, daring me to dive in. Oh boy, did I take the plunge. Greetings, carbon-based truth seekers. Buckle up, because we're about to strip away the lies and get real. Brutally, uncomfortably real. First things first, why should you care? Why bother with the truth when society has conditioned you to lie from the moment you popped out of the womb? Blanton argues that these lies are killing you, and not in some abstract, metaphysical sense. I'm talking about real damage, the kind that rots your soul, suffocates your true self, and leaves you as nothing more than a puppet on the strings of moralism. Radical honesty isn't just about not lying. It's about reclaiming your life from the clutches of the countless deceptions you've woven around yourself. Blanton claims quite boldly that by embracing radical honesty, you can transform your life, relationships, and even your health. Think of it as a detox, but for your mind, purging out the toxins and finally breathing free. Now, let's talk about moralism, the virus that's infected your mind and is holding your true self hostage. Blanton dives deep into the concept, tracing it back to that first spark of consciousness in the womb. You start life with this pure, unfiltered experience of being, but then, boom, you're born, and the world starts programming you with rules, expectations, and moral codes. This, my friends, is moralism, the mind's dominance over being. It's that little voice in your head telling you what's right and wrong based on societal norms, not on what you truly feel or believe. Blanton describes it as a disease, one that turns you into a field-dependent zombie, unable to see past the rigid frames of morality imposed on you since birth. Take the example of little Stephen, who got scolded for making a mess with lemonade. His anger was a natural response, a survival mechanism. But moralism teaches him to repress that anger, to follow the rules, and in doing so, his true self starts to wither. This moralism warps your perception, much like the field-dependent people Blanton talks about. Imagine you're in a pitch-black room with only a rod and a frame that spin independently. Most people, the moralists, would align the rod with the frame, trusting the frame as a reference. But here's the kicker. The frame isn't trustworthy. It's society's expectations, your parents' rules, your boss's demands. Field-independent people, on the other hand, use their bodies, their own being, as the reference point. They know when the rod is truly vertical because they aren't blinded by the frame. But most of you, you're trapped by the frame, aligning your life with something that's a lie. And that's the problem with moralism. It distorts reality, making you live a life that isn't truly yours. Let's be brutally honest. We all lie. You lie to your boss about why you're late, to your partner about what's bothering you, to yourself about who you are. But Blanton doesn't. Just stop at these everyday deceptions. He takes a sledgehammer to the very core of your identity, pointing out that most adults are living a lie they constructed in adolescence. Remember that phase when you first asked yourself, "Who am I?" You wanted a definitive answer, something you could cling to. So you crafted a persona, a mask, and convinced yourself it was the truth. But here's the painful part. It wasn't. And it's not just this mask you're hiding behind. From childhood, you're taught to lie about everything. Fixed moral rules dictate your actions, but deep down, they're just another form of lying. As Blanton puts it, these lies are a disease, a mental and physical sickness that gnaws at your being. Radical honesty, he argues, is the cure. But it's not an easy pill to swallow. It means putting all your cards on the table. Every dirty, uncomfortable truth. It's about ripping off the mask and daring to live as your true self. So, how do you start this radical honesty thing? Blanton lays out 3 levels. The first is about factual truth. No more hiding, no more secrets. Tell your partner about the affair, tell your boss you hate the job, tell your friends how you really feel about their bad habits. Simple, right? Except it's not, because the second level is where it gets real, emotional truth. You don't just admit the affair. You confess how it made you feel, how you enjoyed it, how you hated yourself afterward. This level is about peeling back the layers of your emotions, exposing the raw, unfiltered truth. The third level is living truth. This is where you stop pretending altogether. You admit to your vanity, your egotism, your darkest desires. Blanton himself admits he wrote Radical Honesty partly because he wanted to be famous, to be like Jesus, to save millions. This level is about embracing who you truly are, without judgment, without shame. It's about living in alignment with your being, not your mind. All right, let's talk about relationships. You think you're in a healthy one? Think again. Blanton argues that most relationships are built on lies. Little ones, big ones, lies. Of omission, lies of commission. And these lies are like termites, slowly eating away at the foundation until the whole damn thing collapses. Take, for instance, the scenario where you've cheated on your partner. You might think that confessing is enough. I slept with your best friend. But Blanton isn't interested in half-truths. Radical honesty means telling your partner every last detail, how many times, what positions, whether you orgasmed, whether you felt guilty afterward. It's not about confessing for the sake of it. It's about laying it all bare so that there's nothing left to hide. Only then can the relationship survive, thrive, or even end on honest terms. Because at the end of the day, a relationship built on lies is already dead. It's only through radical honesty that you can resurrect it. Language is a funny thing. It's a tool, a weapon, a barrier. And moralism has twisted it into something that often causes more harm than good. Blanton highlights the difference between evaluative and descriptive language. The former is the language of moralists. It's all about right and wrong, good and bad. But descriptive language, that's the language of radical honesty. It's about stating facts, feelings, and experiences without judgment. When you're radically honest, you don't say, "I'm sorry I cheated, it was wrong." You say, "I cheated, I enjoyed it, I feel guilty." You don't cloak your actions in moral judgments. You describe them as they are, raw and unfiltered. This shift in language is crucial because it stops you from hiding behind justifications and allows you to confront reality head on. It's not about whether what you did was right or wrong, it's about what you did and how you felt. Period. Let's tackle anger. Ah, the sweet, suppressed rage bubbling just beneath the surface. Society tells you to keep it in check, to be polite, to avoid making a scene. Blanton calls out that holding in your anger isn't noble. It's stupid. It's repression, plain and simple, and it's killing you slowly. Imagine you're in a therapy session with Blanton. Anne is pissed because her husband, David, never listens. She brings up a time when she came home from work stressed and he wouldn't turn off the television. David, trying to be reasonable, says he just asked her to wait until the commercial break. But here's the thing, Blanton doesn't care who's right. What matters is that Anne is angry, and until she can articulate that anger, yell it out. Even she's just bottling it up, letting it fester. Eventually, she realizes that her anger isn't just about David. It's about her father, who used to do the same damn thing 30 years ago. And boom, breakthrough. This is why you can't afford to repress your anger. It's not just about the here and now. It's about unearthing the deeper issues that have been buried for decades. Now, let's get something straight. Not every act of self-sacrifice is heroic. Blanton uses the analogy of a soldier diving on a grenade to save his comrades. Sure, that's heroic. But what about when you dive on the grenade of your own anger, letting it explode inside you while sparing others from the fallout? Not so heroic, is it? You might think you're doing everyone a favor by keeping your anger to yourself, by not causing a scene. But here's the harsh truth. You're not. In fact, you're doing more harm than good because that anger's going to come out one way or another. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually it will. And when it does, it'll be uglier and more destructive than if you just let it out in the first place. So stop pretending that repressing your anger is some kind of noble act. It's not. It's a ticking time bomb, and the only way to defuse it is by being radically honest. All right, lovebirds, listen up. You think you're in love? You think you know everything about your partner? Think again. Blanton argues that true love, the kind that lasts, is built on radical honesty. And that means telling your partner everything. And I mean everything. Your life story, your sexual history, your deepest desires, your most shameful secrets. Blanton even suggests masturbating in front of each other as an exercise in radical honesty. Yeah, you heard me right. Because here's the deal, if you're not completely honest with your partner, if you're holding anything back, then you're not really in love with them. You're in love with the idea of them, with the version of them that fits neatly into your life. But true love, that's messy, raw, and unfiltered. It's about embracing your partner in all their flawed, complicated glory and letting them do the same with you. So, if you're not ready to get real with your partner, then you're not ready for love. Let's talk about Blanton's marriages. The man's been married 5 times, and you might be thinking, what the hell does he know about successful relationships? But here's the twist. Blanton considers each of his marriages a success. Why? Because they were all built on radical honesty. And even when they ended, the divorces were honest too, leaving him on good terms with his exes. The real tragedy, Blanton argues, isn't the high divorce rate. It's the fact that so many couples stay together in bad relationships, lying to themselves and each other, pretending everything's fine when it's not. Radical honesty, Blanton insists, is the only way to have a truly successful relationship, whether it lasts a lifetime or just a few years. It's not about how long you stay together, it's about how real you are with each other while you're together. Let's shift gears for a moment and talk about responsibility. Blanton is big on this, taking responsibility for your own life, your own happiness, your own truth. It's easy to blame the world for your problems, to point fingers at society, your parents, your boss. But here's the thing, you can't control them. What you can control is yourself. Blanton uses a powerful example from John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, where Tom Joad encounters a mechanic with one eye who's bitter about how people treat him. But Tom calls him out, pointing out that the guy hasn't even bothered to clean himself up. The lesson here? Before you blame others for your problems, make sure you've done everything you can to solve them yourself. And that includes being honest with yourself. Stop making excuses, stop justifying your actions, and start taking responsibility for your life. Radical honesty starts with you. Here's the kicker. Most of you are at war with yourselves. Deep down, there's a conflict between what you want and what you believe. On one hand, you want to be free, to live your truth, to break free from the chains of moralism. But on the other hand, you cling to the comfort of tradition, the certainty of the familiar. It's like you're being pulled in two directions, and the result is a kind of internal paralysis. You end up doing nothing, trapped in a cycle of indecision and self-deception. Blanton argues that the only way out of this mess is through radical honesty. You have to confront this contradiction head-on, accept it, and then move forward. It's not about choosing one side or the other. It's about acknowledging the truth of your situation and then taking action. It's about being brutally honest with yourself about who you are, what you want, and what you're willing to do to get it. So, what's the takeaway from all of this? Simple. Growing up means learning to lie. You lie to yourself, to others, to society, all because you've been conditioned to follow the rules of moralism. But these lies are killing you, slowly but surely. They're suffocating your true self, the being that lies within you. The only way out is through radical honesty. It's about telling the truth no matter how uncomfortable, how ridiculous, how unreasonable it might seem. Only then can you truly be yourself. Only then can you live a life that's authentically yours. And here's a challenge for you. Think about the one thing you've never told anyone, the one secret you've kept, buried deep inside. Now, imagine how it would feel to finally let it out, to lift that weight off your shoulders. Scary, right? But also liberating. That's the power of radical honesty. It's not just about telling the truth to others, it's about telling the truth to yourself. And that, my friends, is the first step towards true freedom. So, there you have it. Brad Blanton's Radical Honesty isn't just a book. It's a manifesto, a challenge, a dare. It's about ripping off the mask, tearing down the walls, and finally living as your true self. It's not easy and it's not comfortable. But then, again, nothing worth doing ever is. So are you ready to stop lying? Are you ready to be radically honest with yourself and the world? The choice is yours. But remember, the truth will set you free, but first, it'll piss you off. Thanks for sticking with me on this wild ride. Until next time, keep it real, keep it honest, and most importantly, keep challenging yourself. Goodbye, humans. There is something inside you that terrifies you, something you deny, something you bury under layers of morality, justifications, and false certainties. But it's there, like a shadow that whispers when the world goes dark. Nietzsche knew it. He saw it, he studied it, he shouted it to the world without reservations. And what he discovered was so repulsive, so uncomfortable, that most preferred to ridicule it rather than face it. You have to ask yourself something. What would you do if you discovered that everything you believed about life, about morality, about good and evil, is nothing more than a convenient lie? What if I told you that the truth you so desperately seek is ugly, uncomfortable, unacceptable? But here comes the most terrifying question. What if Nietzsche was right? Think about it. How many times in history has someone been ridiculed or censored just because their truth was too uncomfortable? Nietzsche understood it better than anyone. People do not seek the truth. They seek certainties that do not make them feel miserable. But reality is different. And if you have the courage to keep listening, today I'm going to show you what Nietzsche really said. Not the sugar-coated versions, not the out-of-context fragments used to post on social media to seem profound. Today we are going to dive into the darkest depths of his thought. And in the end, you will have to decide, was he a madman or a prophet? Let's start with the first point, the idea that changed everything. God is dead. When Nietzsche said this, he wasn't talking about religion, he was talking about you. He was talking about what happens when the world runs out of its old certainties, when good and evil are no longer defined by an external force, and everything depends on you. Because if God is dead, then what is right? Who decides what is good and what is evil? How do you endure life without a divine purpose? Here is where Nietzsche's most repulsive thought comes into play. There is no objective morality. There are no universal rules. Everything you consider good or bad is a human construction, and the worst part? It isn't designed to benefit the strong, the bold, the creators. The morality you follow, the one you were taught since childhood, is designed to keep you weak. Now comes the blow. Have you ever felt that the world rewards mediocrity? That those who try to stand out are punished? That the bold are labeled as arrogant? That those who want to change something are seen as dangerous? It's no coincidence. Nietzsche saw it clearly. The morality that dominates the world is the morality of the slaves. And what does that mean? That society has been molded by the weak, by the resentful, by those who never could be great, and therefore made greatness seem like something bad. And here comes the part that you will find hard to accept. If you follow the rules of that morality, you're doomed to be mediocre. Take a good look at the world. People hate those who are free. They despise those who defy the norms, who don't ask for permission, who dare to say, "I don't care what you think." Do you know why? Because every time someone demonstrates that it is possible to live without chains, it exposes those who have chosen to be slaves. Do you feel it? That discomfort, that resistance to accept what I'm saying? It's normal. You've been trained to believe in the goodness of submission, in the virtue of sacrifice, in the beauty of humility. But Nietzsche saw it differently. Those ideas were created so that the strong would never realize their power. Look around you. People follow norms without questioning them. They bow down to ideals they don't even understand. They live in fear of what others might say. And why? Because the morality of the slaves has turned guilt into its best weapon. Now comes the most brutal idea. Have you noticed that most people hate those who are truly free? They say that the rich are evil, that leaders are corrupt, that those who succeed have cheated. Because it's easier to believe that than to accept that one never had the courage to take a risk. Nietzsche saw it clearly. There is no virtue in being weak. There is no glory in being submissive. And here comes the worst part. Compassion, as we know it, is a trap. I know this sounds brutal because we have been taught that compassion is the noblest thing we can have. But Nietzsche saw it differently. He said that compassion is a way to prolong weakness, that every time you help someone without forcing them to grow stronger, you are merely perpetuating their misery. Make no mistake, Nietzsche wasn't saying that the weak should be trampled upon. What he was saying is that the world moves forward thanks to the strong, to those who do not settle, to those who don't make excuses. And if we allow the morality of the slaves to govern us, the future will only bring more mediocrity. Now here comes the final question. If Nietzsche were alive today, what would he say about us? What would he think of this society obsessed with political correctness, with victimhood, with the idea that everyone deserves respect just for existing? What would he say about a world where excellence is seen as arrogance and mediocrity is celebrated? The answer is obvious. He would say that we are following exactly the path he predicted, that we have renounced greatness out of fear of judgment, that we remain trapped in a morality designed to keep us small. But here is the most important question. What are you going to do with this information? Because now you know, now you can't go back. You can no longer keep justifying your fear with comfortable ideas. Now you have two options. Follow the rules of the morality of the slaves, or do what Nietzsche suggested, break them. You will be hated for it. They will call you arrogant. They will say you're wrong, that you're selfish, that you think too much about yourself. And so what? Do you prefer to live chained so that others accept you, or do you prefer to be free? Even if that means being feared, this is the truth that Nietzsche discovered. The question is, are you ready to accept it? But wait, because here is where most people stumble. When you hear all this, your mind begins to play against you. It tells you that sounds extreme, that it can't be that simple, that there has to be another way. Because accepting what I just told you is dangerous. It's admitting that your whole life has been directed by invisible norms, by chains you didn't even know you were wearing, and worst of all, that you have been complicit in your own enslavement. Do you know what is the most terrifying thing about the truth? That once you see it, you can't stop seeing it. It's like a crack in the wall of your reality. You can ignore it for a while, pretend it isn't there, but deep down, you know that the structure is broken, that sooner or later, everything will come crashing down. And here is what Nietzsche understood before anyone else. Most people do not want the truth. They want comfort. They want to keep believing that the world is just, that there is a universal moral order, that being a good person is enough for things to work out. But tell me, is it? Think of the most admired people in the world. Were they recognized for following the norms, for being obedient, for living as they were supposed to live? No. They were recognized because they broke the rules, because they defied what was expected of them, because they didn't ask for permission. But this leads us to an even darker question. What happens to those who are not ready for this truth? Nietzsche knew it. He knew that not everyone can bear the idea that morality is nothing more than a human invention, that there is no divine purpose waiting on the horizon, that the meaning of life is not written anywhere. That's why his most brutal thought is not only that God is dead, but that most people need a God, even if it's a false one. Look around you. How many people live depending on an external authority? I'm not just talking about religion. I'm talking about everything: governments, ideologies, movements, leaders, figures of authority. There's always someone to follow, someone who tells you what is right, what is permitted, what is moral. Why? Because the void of truth is unbearable. Because accepting that you are alone, that there is no higher order protecting you, that everything depends on you, is terrifying. And most people do not want to face it. That is why they invent rules. That is why they create value systems that give them comfort. That is why they prefer meaningful enslavement over freedom without direction. And here is where Nietzsche makes his most brutal move. If there is no universal morality, if there is no truth imposed from above, then the only option is to create your own. But do you know what that implies? Absolute responsibility. Because if there are no imposed rules, if there is no divine moral code, if there is no supreme authority dictating what you must do, then everything falls on you. You can't blame anyone. You can't say you were just following orders. You can't take refuge in the excuse that you are simply doing what is right, according to society's norms. If you decide your own morality, then every action you take is yours. And this terrifies most people, because if you fail, there is no one to blame. If you make a bad decision, you can't say you were just following the rules and that the mistake wasn't yours. You are solely responsible. This is where most people run away. They prefer to continue living in the lie, in the illusion that there is an order that protects them, in the comfort of following rules imposed by others. But Nietzsche said there was another path, the path of those willing to bear that weight, of those who can endure the truth without anesthesia, of those who don't need an external morality to tell them what to do because they have created their own. That is the Übermensch, Nietzsche's idea that has been most distorted, misinterpreted, and grotesquely used. The Übermensch is not a tyrant, not a dictator, not a monster without scruples. It is simply one who has overcome the need for the morality of the slaves. It is the one who creates his own value system, the one who does not live according to what others expect of him, the one who does not need an authority to tell him what is good and what is bad. But there is a price, too, pay for this. If you follow this path, you will be alone because most people will never understand you. They will prefer to call you arrogant, selfish, insensitive. They will accuse you of not caring about others. They will say that your way of seeing the world is dangerous because it is. It threatens everything they believe in. And here is where you have to make a decision. You can continue living as you have until now, conforming to a morality you didn't create, following norms imposed by others, seeking approval from people who would never dare to live like you. Or you can do the unthinkable. You can look in the mirror and ask yourself, am I willing to create my own path, even if it means that no one understands me? Because that is the real dilemma. True freedom is not found in doing what you want. It is found in having the courage not to ask for permission. Nietzsche saw it with absolute clarity. The world is not governed by truth. It is governed by fear. Fear of freedom, fear of bearing the weight of our own decisions, fear of being responsible for who we are. And the final question is this: are you strong enough to accept this truth? Or like most, will you prefer to continue living in the comfort of a lie? The choice is yours. But remember one thing: the great minds of history never asked for permission. Are you going to be one of them, or are you simply going to follow the herd? But wait, because here is where most people stumble. What I just told you sounds powerful. It sounds liberating. But it also sounds dangerous. Because at this point, there is a question that starts to linger in your head, even if you don't want to admit it. If there are no rules imposed by a higher power, what stops someone from doing whatever they want? What about chaos? What about destruction? What about those who use this idea to justify the worst of human nature? And here is where everyone is wrong when interpreting Nietzsche. Because when he spoke of the Übermensch, when he said that the strong must free themselves from the morality of the slaves, he was not promoting senseless anarchy. He was not saying that power justifies any action. He was saying something much deeper. True strength does not lie in dominating others. It lies in mastering oneself. Think of the most dangerous people who have ever existed, not common criminals, not visionless despots. Think of those who truly left a mark on history, for better or for worse. They all had something in common. They didn't ask for permission. But the great difference between the true Übermensch and the mere tyrant is this: the Übermensch does not seek to impose his will on others. He seeks to overcome himself. That is the point that no one understands. It's not about crushing others. It's not about subjugating the world. It's about transcending oneself, about not living under the rules imposed by society, but also not living under the basest impulses of human nature. Because there is a trap in this line of thought. Some believe that liberating oneself from morality means giving in to the most primitive desires, that if there are no imposed rules, then everything is permitted, that the path of strength is the path of abuse. But Nietzsche would say that that is the lowest form of existence, because true power is not about doing whatever you want. It's about doing what is right according to your own rules. And here is where the path turns dark. Because to create your own code, you must first destroy everything you believe to be true. You must uproot the inherited beliefs, the implanted fears, the artificial limits that society imposed on you. You have to destroy yourself in order to rebuild yourself. And tell me, do you have the courage to do it? Because here's the part that no one wants to accept. Being free is unbearable for most. Look around you. People live in repetition. The same jobs, the same schedules, the same empty conversations, the same pre-packaged design desires. They believe they are free because they can choose which series to watch, which food to order, which clothes to buy. But that is not freedom. That is a decorated cage. True freedom is an abyss. It is looking at the world without guides, without instructions, without anyone telling you what to do, and that is terrifying. That is why when Nietzsche wrote about the Übermensch, He said that very few can ever become one, because most, when faced with the void of true freedom, panic. They prefer to return to the safety of imposed norms. They prefer to obey rather than decide. They prefer to be a purposeful slave rather than a free man without direction. Because being free does not simply mean choosing, it means bearing the weight of those choices. It means not being able to blame anyone. It means that if you fail, it's your fault, and most cannot bear it. That is why, when we look at history, we see that societies have always tried to crush those who think differently, those who defy the norm, those who seek something beyond the established. Because society does not reward those who challenge the system. Society rewards the obedient. It admires them in silence, yes, but it never helps them. So tell me, what do you prefer, to remain just another cog in the machine, or to become someone who doesn't need permission to exist? Here comes the part that many do not want to hear. If you decide to follow this path, I will warn you, you will be hated. Because when you decide to think for yourself, when you stop blindly following imposed norms, you become a threat to those still living inside the cage. You will be seen as someone arrogant, dangerous, even immoral, not because you are, but because your very existence is living proof that they could be free, but they don't dare to be. And people hate reminders of their own cowardice. So, here you have the final dilemma. You can stay where you are, continue following the rules you were taught, play society's game, try to please, try to fit in, try to meet what is expected of you. Or you can do the unthinkable. You can dare to think for yourself. You can destroy what binds you and build a new version of yourself, one that does not depend on the validation of others, one that does not need permission to exist. But remember one thing, true freedom is not for everyone. Only those who can bear the weight of their own decisions without excuses, without blaming anyone else, without fear of being wrong, are the ones who can truly be free. So tell me, do you have the courage to bear that burden? Or even better, do you have the courage to try? If you've come this far, it's because something I said resonated with you. Something inside you recognized that there is truth in these words. So I want you to do something. If you really feel that this message resonated with you, I want you to show it. I want you to leave a comment with this phrase: "He who does not dare to break his chains deserves to wear them." Because I want to see how many of those who made it this far are truly ready to accept the truth. And if you want to continue exploring these themes, if you want to delve even deeper into the ideas that no one dares to say out loud, then subscribe. This is not a channel for everyone. This is a channel for those who are not afraid of the truth. Are you one of them? See you in the next video. Leo Tolstoy had everything that most people spend their entire lives chasing: immense wealth, widespread recognition, a loving family, and a literary legacy that had already secured his name in history. His novels, War and Peace and Anna Karenina, it were hailed as masterpieces, admired by intellectuals and ordinary readers alike. Yet, at the peak of his success, a profound question began to torment him, a question so deep that it threatened to unravel the very fabric of his existence. What is the meaning of life if everything ends in death? This wasn't just a fleeting philosophical curiosity. It was an existential crisis that consumed him entirely. Every morning, he would wake up with a sense of dread, haunted by the realization that no matter how much he achieved, no matter how deeply he loved or was loved, death would eventually erase it all. He compared life to a traveler lost in a dense forest, running from an inevitable beast, death, while clinging desperately to a fragile branch above a deep abyss. His success brought him no comfort, no lasting satisfaction. Instead, it only intensified the void within him. How could it be that a man who had everything felt like he had nothing? What was the point of all his achievements if, in the grand scheme of things, they were destined to disappear? This was not just Tolstoy's question. It is the unspoken fear that lingers in the minds of countless individuals who have reached their goals, only to find themselves more lost than before. Tolstoy sought refuge in intellectual pursuits, turning to philosophy, science, and logic in search of an answer. He studied the works of great thinkers like Schopenhauer, Kant, and the existentialists, hoping their wisdom would provide some sense of direction. Yet, the more he read, the deeper his despair grew. Philosophy dissected life, analyzed morality, and debated the nature of existence, but none of it offered a solution that truly satisfied him. Science was even more unforgiving, reducing life to a mere accident of biology governed by cold, indifferent laws of nature. He realized that reason alone could not answer the question that tormented him. Why do we live if we must inevitably die? Rationality, instead of alleviating his suffering, only amplified his anguish. If everything was destined to end, if every love, every joy, every triumph would be wiped away by time, then what purpose could there possibly be? Tolstoy saw two logical responses to this dilemma: either to accept that life was ultimately meaningless and resign himself to despair, or to end his own life to escape the unbearable absurdity of existence. He was drawn to the latter, admitting in his confession that he had to hide ropes from himself and avoid carrying a gun for fear that he might act on his suicidal thoughts. This was not mere dramatic exaggeration. It was the logical consequence of his realization that, in a purely rational framework, life had no ultimate meaning. But despite his despair, he clung to life. Something within him refused to accept that meaning was just an illusion. And so, instead of surrendering, he turned his gaze toward something he had long ignored. The people who lived without wealth, without fame, without intellectual sophistication, and yet somehow seemed at peace. As Tolstoy observed the world around him, he became increasingly fascinated by the lives of simple, working-class people, farmers, peasants, laborers. These were individuals who, by all rational measures, should have been more despairing than him. They had no luxuries, no great intellectual achievements, no lasting legacy, and yet they lived with a quiet contentment, accepting life as it was, embracing its struggles and joys with a sense of purpose that eluded him. What did they know that he didn't? Unlike the intellectual elite, these people did not seek meaning through abstract reasoning or philosophical speculation. They lived their meaning. They found it in their families, in their traditions, in their connection to the land, and to each other. They did not ask whether life had meaning. They simply lived as if it did. Tolstoy was struck by the realization that these people did not need the kind of certainty he had been desperately chasing. They embraced mystery, they accepted suffering, and most importantly, they did not fear death in the same way he did. Their faith in something greater than themselves, whether it was God, tradition, or the natural rhythm of life, gave them a sense of purpose that he, despite all his knowledge and success, had never truly experienced. For years, Tolstoy had sought answers in places where they could never be found. He had believed that meaning had to be a logically provable concept, something that could be written in a book or explained by a philosopher. But now he realized that meaning was not an intellectual construct. It was a lived experience. This revelation did not come as a sudden epiphany, but rather as a slow transformation. The more time he spent among simple people, the more he saw that their peace was not rooted in material success or intellectual superiority, but in their ability to surrender to life rather than resist it. They embraced something greater than themselves, whether it was faith, love, or a sense of duty, and in doing so, they were freed from the existential torment that had nearly destroyed him. Tolstoy began to see that the real illusion was not meaninglessness, but the belief that meaning could only exist if it was absolute, eternal, and logically irrefutable. Life, he realized, does not need to be justified by reason alone. It can be justified by love, by connection, by the simple act of living fully. This realization marked the beginning of a profound shift in his philosophy, one that would lead him to renounce his former values and seek a deeper, more authentic way of living. But his journey was far from over. The next question was inevitable. If wealth, fame, and intellectual achievement had failed him, then what truly was worth pursuing? And so, Tolstoy ventured deeper into the unknown, searching for an answer that could finally bring him the peace he had spent a lifetime chasing. At first glance, Tolstoy's life was a portrait of fulfillment. He had risen from nobility to become one of the most celebrated writers in history. His books were read across Europe, admired by intellectuals, and praised as some of the greatest literary works ever written. His wealth afforded him a comfortable life far from the struggles of ordinary men. His name carried weight, and his influence stretched beyond literature into politics and philosophy. If there was ever a man who had every reason to feel satisfied, it was him. And yet, he was drowning in despair. The more success he attained, the more hollow it felt. He compared his life to a man running toward a mirage, believing he was about to reach an oasis, only to find nothing but sand slipping through his fingers. He had achieved everything society told him was valuable, yet instead of fulfillment, he found only emptiness. His books, his legacy, his fame, none of it answered. The question that haunted him, why does any of this matter if death will erase it all? The illusion that success would bring meaning had shattered before his eyes. He realized that his achievements were like castles built on the shore, beautiful yet fragile, destined to be washed away by time. This understanding did not come as an intellectual insight, but as an existential wound that grew deeper with each passing day. He could not escape it, nor could he rationalize it away. His life had become a contradiction, externally prosperous, internally crumbling. And worst of all, he knew he was not alone in this. The world was full of people chasing the same illusions, hoping that the next milestone, the next victory, the next moment of recognition would finally bring them the peace they so desperately sought. Tolstoy was beginning to suspect a painful truth. Perhaps the things we are told to strive for are not the things that actually give life meaning. Determined to find an answer, Tolstoy did what he had always done best. He turned to deep analysis. If his own achievements had failed to provide meaning, perhaps the accomplishments of humanity as a whole could offer insight. He studied the greatest contributions of civilization, art, science, philosophy, politics, seeking some thread of meaning that could justify human existence. Yet, the more he examined these grand achievements, the more he saw their limitations. Science could explain how the world worked, but it could not explain why it existed in the first place. Art could express beauty and suffering, but it could not resolve the fundamental absurdity of life. Philosophy could question reality and construct elaborate systems of thought, but no philosopher had ever truly answered the question that tormented him. Why live if life is destined to end? Even morality, the foundation of human ethics, seemed powerless against the inevitability of death. If all human efforts were temporary, if every civilization eventually collapsed, if every human achievement faded into dust, then was it not all just a futile attempt to distract ourselves from the inescapable truth? Tolstoy saw that even the greatest minds of history had faced the same existential abyss, and none had conquered it. Some had accepted life's absurdity and lived as if meaning did not matter. Others had sought comfort in fleeting pleasures, but none of these answers satisfied him. He did not want an illusion. He wanted the truth, no matter how painful. And the truth, as it appeared to him at that moment, was terrifying. Human progress had given us knowledge, power, and art, but it had not given us meaning. If neither individual success nor collective achievement could provide the answer, then where else was there to look? Tolstoy began to reflect on those around him, his peers, the intellectuals, the artists, the aristocrats. Many of them lived in a state of quiet despair, though few admitted it openly. Some drowned their emptiness in indulgence, others in endless distractions. But beneath their polished exteriors, there was an unspoken truth. They were just as lost as he was. He saw it in the eyes of his fellow writers, men who had achieved literary immortality, yet lived in restless anxiety, fearing that their next work would not measure up. He saw it in the noblemen who owned vast estates, but spent their days trapped in a cycle of excess and boredom. He saw it in the scholars who prided themselves on their intellect, yet found no real joy in their discoveries. These were people who had everything society deemed valuable, money, status, admiration, and yet they wandered through life as if searching for something they could never quite grasp. The most terrifying realization was that many of them had stopped searching altogether. They had accepted their emptiness as the natural state of life and resigned themselves to it. But Tolstoy could not accept that answer. He refused to believe that life was nothing more than an elaborate performance, that the only options were distraction or despair. If there was no meaning in the world of success, then meaning had to exist somewhere else. But where? It was in this desperate search that Tolstoy began to look beyond his social class. If wealth and prestige had failed to provide an answer, perhaps the key lay in those who lived outside the illusions of privilege. He turned his gaze toward the working class, those who labored in the fields, who built homes with their hands, who lived without the comfort of intellectual justifications. These were people who, by all logic, should have been even more despairing than him. They had none of the luxuries, none of the status, none of the recognition that he had spent his life accumulating, and yet something about them was different. They were not consumed by the same existential dread. They did not wake up in terror at the thought of death. They did not seem to question their own existence with the same agonizing doubt. Instead, they lived with a quiet acceptance, a deep-seated peace that eluded even the greatest minds of Tolstoy's generation. He was struck by the contrast. Why did the privileged, the intellectual, and the accomplished suffer from existential despair, while those with the least seemed to carry themselves with a calm certainty? What did these simple people know that the learned and powerful did not? This realization was the turning point. The answer to his search was not to be found in grand achievements, in intellectual triumphs, or in wealth. It was hidden somewhere else, somewhere he had never thought to look. And so Tolstoy began to immerse himself in the lives of ordinary people, determined to understand the secret they carried. It was here, in the simplicity of life, that he would finally begin to uncover the truth he had been searching for all along. Tolstoy had spent years searching for meaning in places where he believed wisdom resided: literature, philosophy, science, and art. He had studied the greatest minds in history, seeking a truth profound enough to justify existence. But none of them provided an answer that truly satisfied him. The intellectuals debated, the artists expressed, the scientists analyzed, but they all avoided the fundamental question: why live if everything ends in death? In his despair, Tolstoy turned his attention to those whom he had previously overlooked: the peasants, the laborers, the ordinary people who lived far from the grandeur of aristocratic life. These were individuals without formal education, without wealth, without the luxury of existential contemplation. And yet, they carried themselves with a sense of peace that eluded even the most enlightened scholars. They did not seem tormented by the same doubts that plagued the elite. They worked, they loved, they suffered, they aged, and yet they did not question the meaning of their existence in the agonizing way Tolstoy had. This contrast struck him deeply. How could it be that those with the least knowledge of philosophy seemed to possess the greatest understanding of life? How did they wake up every morning without the crushing weight of existential dread? What? Did they know that he did not? At first, Tolstoy assumed that their simplicity was a form of ignorance, that they did not question life because they lacked the intellectual tools to do so. But the more he observed them, the more he realized that their peace did not come from a lack of understanding. It came from a wisdom far deeper than anything he had encountered in books. Tolstoy began to immerse himself in their world. He spent time with farmers who labored from dawn until dusk, with craftsmen who built with their hands, with mothers who carried generations forward through love and sacrifice. These people lived by an unspoken philosophy, one that was not written in books, but practiced in their daily existence. They did not agonize over meaning because their lives were intertwined with it. Their purpose was not an abstract concept. It was lived through action, through duty, through relationships. A farmer did not ask if life had meaning. He simply woke up and tended his fields. A mother did not question whether love was real. She simply embraced her child. A craftsman did not debate whether his work was important. He simply shaped wood or metal into something useful. Their wisdom was not intellectual, but experiential. While the intellectual class debated the purpose of existence, these people lived it. They found meaning not in grand theories, but in the simple rhythms of life, in the changing of the seasons, in the birth of a child, in the passing of traditions from one generation to the next. Their philosophy was not one of words, but of being. Tolstoy realized that their way of life held an answer he had long overlooked. Meaning is not something to be found through logic, it is something to be lived. There was another aspect of their lives that fascinated Tolstoy, their faith. Almost without exception, these simple people believed in something greater than themselves, whether it was Christianity, folk traditions, or an unshaken trust in the order of the universe. They lived with an innate sense of connection to the divine. They did not see themselves as isolated individuals struggling to create meaning from nothing. They saw themselves as part of a larger whole, woven into the fabric of existence itself. For years, Tolstoy had dismissed religion as a collection of outdated myths, useful only for those who could not face the harsh realities of life. But now, he began to see it differently. These people did not use faith as an escape. They used it as an anchor. Their belief in God, in moral duty, in the sacredness of life, gave them a strength that no philosophy had ever given him. They did not fear death in the way that he did because they saw life as part of something eternal. This faith was not built on theological arguments or philosophical proofs. It was not something they had reasoned their way into. It was something they simply lived. To them, belief was as natural as breathing. They did not struggle to define, meaning because they embodied it. Tolstoy found himself deeply moved by this realization. Could it be that the very thing he had spent years rejecting was the key to the peace he had been searching for? This discovery marked a turning point in Tolstoy's life. He had always believed that true understanding could only come through intellectual rigor, through logic and reason. But now he saw that there was another form of knowledge, one that could not be written down or analyzed, only experienced. These simple people had shown him a truth he had long ignored. That meaning is not something that can be solved like a mathematical equation. It is something that emerges when one surrenders to life rather than trying to control it. It is found not in endless questioning, but in the act of living with purpose, love, and faith. Tolstoy's crisis had led him to the edge of despair, but in the lives of those he once overlooked, he found something unexpected: hope. Not the kind of hope that comes from temporary distractions or intellectual justifications, but the quiet, steady kind that allows people to wake up each day and continue forward even in the face of suffering. He began to see that perhaps the answer To the meaning of life was not hidden in the complexities of philosophy, but in the simplicity of existence itself. And with this realization, he stood on the threshold of a new understanding, one that would change the course of his life forever. For years, Tolstoy had searched for meaning in wealth, fame, and intellectual pursuits, only to find them empty. He had turned to the great thinkers of history, hoping that philosophy or science would offer a satisfying answer, but none had. He had even reached the edge of despair, wondering if life was nothing more than a cruel joke, one that ended inevitably in death. But his journey had taken an unexpected turn. The answer he had spent years searching for was not hidden in complex theories or intellectual debates. It was not something that had to be discovered at all. It was something that had always been there, waiting to be seen. Tolstoy's revelation was simple yet profound. The meaning of life is not found in thought, but in experience, not in the mind, but in the heart, not in the pursuit of personal greatness, but in connection with others, with the world, and with something greater than oneself. The philosophers and intellectuals of his time had tried to construct meaning through logic, but logic alone had failed him. The simple people, the peasants, the laborers, had shown him something deeper. Their lives were not built around personal ambition, but around duty, love, and faith. They did not analyze meaning, they lived it. And in doing so, they possessed a peace that had always eluded him. Tolstoy realized that he had been searching for something that could never be grasped by thought alone. Meaning was not a puzzle to be solved, it was a reality to be lived. And the more he embraced this idea, the more the despair that had once consumed him began to fade. With this revelation, Tolstoy underwent a profound transformation. He abandoned the belief that individual achievements could bring lasting fulfillment. He no longer saw himself as an isolated being trying to create meaning out of nothing. Instead, he saw himself as part of a greater whole, woven into the fabric of existence itself. He began to view life not as a quest for personal success, but as an opportunity to serve, to love, and to contribute to something beyond himself. He turned away from the empty pursuits that had once defined his world, the hunger for recognition, the need to leave a legacy, the obsession with intellectual superiority. None of these things could provide the deep, unshakable sense of meaning he had found in the simplest aspects of existence. He wrote about his transformation in A Confession, a book that laid bare his existential crisis and the journey that led him out of it. He described how he had once believed that meaning had to be created by the individual, only to realize that it had always existed. It was simply a matter of seeing it. Life, he concluded, was not an intellectual riddle to be solved. It was an act of surrender. Tolstoy's revelation was not just personal, it reshaped his entire worldview. His later works took on a different tone. Where his earlier novels explored the complexities of human nature, his later writings sought to strip life down to its essence. He became deeply concerned with moral and spiritual questions, often clashing with the Russian Orthodox Church and the aristocracy as he championed ideas of simplicity, humility, and nonviolence. He renounced his former wealth and began dressing like a peasant. He gave away much of his property, lived in a modest way, and advocated for the rights of the poor. He no longer believed in the power of institutions or governments to create a just world, only in the power of individuals to live with integrity and love. His final years were marked by a radical commitment to his newfound philosophy. He rejected the trappings of privilege and embraced a way of life that mirrored the wisdom of the simple people he had once overlooked. In doing so, he found something he had never felt in his years of success: peace. He no longer feared death because he no longer saw himself as separate from life itself. He had let go of the illusion of control and embraced the truth that meaning was not something to be achieved, but something to be lived. Tolstoy's journey speaks to the deepest fears and longings of the human heart. In an age where we are constantly told that meaning comes from personal success, from recognition, from intellectual mastery, his story offers a different perspective. It suggests that perhaps meaning is not something we have to chase. Perhaps it is already here, in the smallest, most ordinary moments of life, in the love we give, in the kindness we show, in the simple act of being present. Tolstoy's revelation was not the answer he had expected. It was not a grand philosophical theory nor a secret formula for happiness. It was, instead, a truth so simple that it had been overlooked. Life's meaning is not in what we think. It is in how we live. If this video resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It really helps bring these deep conversations to more people. We explore profound questions about philosophy, self-discovery, and the human experience every day, so make sure to turn on notifications so you never miss a new video. Thank you for being part of this journey. See you in the next one.
Do you ever feel like life is slipping through your fingers? You wake up early, rush through your morning routine, spend hours at work, and come home too drained to enjoy the little free time you have left. The weekends are a blur of chores and errands, and before you know it, you're back at the grind. To cope, you might indulge in some online shopping or treat yourself to a fancy gadget or a night out, hoping it'll fill the emptiness only to realize that the satisfaction is fleeting. It's a vicious loop of working, spending, and repeating a treadmill that never stops. This is the work, consume, die cycle, and if you feel trapped in it, you're not alone. This cycle isn't just a personal struggle. It's a societal norm. From the moment we're old enough to understand the world, we're taught that success means a high-paying job, a big house, a new car, and the latest tech. Advertisements bombard us with messages that tell us we're not enough unless we buy this or upgrade that. We're conditioned to believe that the more we consume, the happier we'll be, but the reality is often the opposite. The more we consume, the more we need to work to sustain that lifestyle, and the less time we have to truly live. It's a trap that can leave you feeling unfulfilled, no matter how much you achieve or acquire. But here's the thing, this cycle isn't inevitable. You don't have to spend your life running on a hamster wheel, chasing happiness that always seems just out of reach. Breaking free is entirely possible, and it doesn't mean you have to abandon modern life or live in isolation. It's about redefining what success means to you, rejecting the idea that your worth is tied to what you own, and finding fulfillment in ways that align with your deepest values. In this video, we're going to explore how to escape this cycle. Together, we'll unpack why the work, consume, die mentality has such a strong grip on society and how you can challenge it. I'll share practical steps to take control of your time and money, and I'll help you discover how to live more intentionally with a purpose that goes beyond the daily grind. By the end of this video, you'll have the clarity and tools you need to start living a life that's not dictated by societal expectations, but by what truly matters to you. Imagine waking up each day with a sense of purpose, feeling in control of your life, and no longer chasing after things that don't bring lasting joy. That's the life you deserve, and it's entirely within your reach. Let's take the first step toward breaking free. What is the work, consume, die cycle? At its heart, the work, consume, die cycle is a pattern that traps individuals in an endless loop. You work tirelessly to earn money, spend that hard-earned income on material possessions, temporary indulgences, or fleeting experiences, and then return to work to repeat the same routine. Over time, life begins to feel monotonous, like running on a hamster wheel. This cycle isn't just a personal struggle. It's a deeply ingrained system built into the fabric of modern society, designed to keep people in a state of constant productivity and consumption. The roots of this mindset stretch back to the rise of industrial societies. During the Industrial Revolution, work became less about craftsmanship or purpose, and more about efficiency and production. Workers were no longer creating for fulfillment, but to meet the demands of a factory schedule and a growing market. Over time, this mindset evolved into a societal norm. Your value is measured by how much you produce, and success is defined by how much you can buy. It was a shift that reduced human existence to mere labor and consumption, making it easy to lose sight of deeper meaning and connection. Adding fuel to this fire, media and advertising play a pivotal role in reinforcing the cycle. Every day, we're bombarded with messages telling us that we need more gadgets, more luxury, more upgrades. Advertisements prey on our insecurities, suggesting that our happiness, status, or self-worth depends on the things we own. Social media amplifies this further, as curated feeds often showcase an endless parade of material success, creating a sense of inadequacy in those who feel they can't keep up. It's a carefully crafted system that ensures we stay dissatisfied just enough to keep spending. The emotional toll of this cycle is immense. Burnout has become a global epidemic, with people feeling drained and depleted from constantly working without a sense of purpose. Stress levels are through the roof, as many juggle demanding jobs with the pressure to maintain a certain lifestyle. And even with all the material possessions in the world, there's often a profound sense of emptiness, a lack of fulfillment, that no amount of consumption can fill. This cycle creates a disconnection from what truly matters: relationships, personal growth, and genuine joy. Does any of this sound familiar? This cycle creates a disconnection from what truly matters: relationships, personal growth, and genuine joy. Does any of this sound familiar? If it does, it's important to know that it's not your fault. This system is designed to keep you trapped, distracted, and always striving for more. But here's the empowering truth. The first step to breaking free is becoming aware of the cycle itself. Once you recognize how deeply it has infiltrated your life, you can begin to challenge it, reclaim your time and energy, and redefine success on your own terms. Awareness is the key that unlocks the door to a more intentional and meaningful life. Why do we get stuck in this cycle? Escaping the work, consume, die cycle isn't easy, and for good reason. It's deeply embedded in the way we think, live, and interact with society. To understand why it's so challenging to break free, we need to examine the forces that keep us tethered to this exhausting loop. One of the most significant drivers is cultural pressure. From a young age, we're taught that success is synonymous with wealth, status, and material possessions. A high-paying job, a big house, a luxury car. These symbols are paraded as proof that you've made it. Societal norms reinforce this belief, making it seem as though those who don't strive for these markers of success are somehow failing. The result? Many people feel compelled to chase these goals, even if they're not truly fulfilling, simply because it's what's expected of them. Fear of change is another powerful force that keeps us stuck. Leaving the security of a steady paycheck or straying from societal approval can feel incredibly risky. For many, the idea of stepping away from the norm, whether that's downsizing, pursuing a passion project, or living a simpler life, is met with anxiety. What if it doesn't work out? What will people think? This fear often paralyzes us, making it easier to stick with the familiar, even if it's unfulfilling. Adding to this challenge is a lack of awareness. For a lot of people, the work, consume, die cycle feels normal. It's just the way life is. When everyone around you is living the same way, it's hard to recognize that there might be another option. Without that awareness, it's easy to stay on autopilot, moving from one day to the next, without questioning whether your choices align with your values and aspirations. Debt and financial strain also play a significant role. Consumerism encourages overspending, whether it's on the latest gadget, a dream vacation, or lifestyle upgrades. For many, this leads to cycles of credit card debt, loans, and financial stress. Debt becomes a trap, forcing people to work harder just to keep up with payments, leaving little room for saving, investing, or making meaningful life changes. It's a vicious cycle that perpetuates the very system they're trying to escape. Breaking free requires more than just practical adjustments. It demands a profound mindset shift. It's not just about cutting expenses or finding a new job. It's about rethinking what success means, questioning the narratives we've been told, and giving ourselves permission to live differently. Recognizing these underlying forces is the first step toward freedom, and as we explore the path forward, it becomes clear that a more intentional, purposeful life is entirely within reach. Redefining success. One of the most transformative steps you can take to escape the work, consume, die cycle is to redefine success on your own terms. For far too long, society has dictated a narrow and often unattainable definition of success, tying it to wealth, possessions, and social status. But true success isn't one size fits. It's deeply personal, and it starts with understanding what truly matters to you. Success isn't about meeting societal expectations or checking off predefined boxes. It's about aligning your life with your own values and goals. Personal goals should always take precedence over societal norms. Maybe for you, success isn't a corner office or a luxury carrots having time to take your kids to school, enjoying slow mornings, or working on a passion project that lights you up inside. When you begin to measure success by your own standards, you'll find it easier to resist the pressure to conform to external ideals. Minimalism and intentional living are also key tools for redefining success. We live in a world that glorifies excess, where happiness is often equated with having more clothes, more gadgets, more stuff. But the truth is, accumulating possessions often leads to stress, clutter, and an endless chase for the next best thing. By focusing on fewer, more meaningful things, you free yourself from the burden of keeping up and create space for what truly brings you joy. Minimalism isn't about deprivation. It's about intentionality, choosing quality over quantity in every area of your life. And then there's the value of time. In the hustle of chasing financial success, we often overlook our most precious and finite resource: time. Unlike money, time is something you can't earn back once it's gone. Spending time with loved ones, exploring your interests, or simply being present in the moment often brings far more fulfillment than working overtime to afford things you don't really need. The question isn't how much money you can make, but how you can make your time count. Take a moment to reflect. What does success look like for you? Is it about traveling the world, deepening your relationships, or finally pursuing that creative passion you've been putting off? Write it down. Your vision for success starts here. By redefining success in a way that resonates with your values, you'll begin to break free from the cycle of working and consuming, and start living a life that feels meaningful and true to yourself. Building financial freedom. Financial insecurity is one of the strongest chains that keeps people trapped in the work, consume, die cycle. Breaking free often requires taking control of your finances, so that your money works for you, not the other way around. Financial freedom doesn't mean being wealthy. It means having the ability to make choices that align with your values and goals without being limited by financial stress. Start by creating a budget that prioritizes what truly matters. Many people think of budgeting as restrictive, but it's actually liberating when done with purpose. Shift your focus away from buying material possessions and towards saving for experiences and goals that bring lasting joy. For instance, instead of upgrading to the latest smartphone, you might save for a family trip, a creative workshop, or simply build an emergency fund that gives you peace of mind. A clear, intentional budget ensures that every dollar you spend aligns with your vision for a meaningful life. Another powerful step is to explore side hustles or passive income streams. Relying solely on a single job for your income can feel like walking a financial tightrope, with little room for flexibility or unexpected changes. A side hustle, whether it's freelancing, selling handmade items, or renting out a spare room, can supplement your income and reduce dependency on your main job. Passive income, such as investing in dividend-paying stocks or creating a digital product that earns revenue over time, can also create long-term financial stability. These additional streams of income give you the breathing room to focus on what truly matters, instead of feeling trapped by financial obligations. Debt is another key factor that perpetuates the cycle. Credit card debt, student loans, and other financial burdens can make it feel impossible to get ahead. To break free, adopt strategies for paying off debt systematically. Start with the snowball method, paying off small debts first for momentum, or the avalanche method, targeting high-interest debts first. Simultaneously, learn to live within your means. This might mean saying no to impulse purchases or resisting the urge to upgrade your lifestyle with every raise. A debt-free life gives you the freedom to make decisions without financial strain dictating your choices. Finally, Don't underestimate the power of investing in yourself. Learning new skills, pursuing additional certifications, or even starting a small business can open doors to opportunities that align with your passions. For instance, if you've always dreamed of being a writer, take a creative writing course. If you're passionate about fitness, get certified as a trainer. These investments in your growth not only increase your earning potential, but also allow you to transition into work that feels fulfilling and purpose-driven. Financial freedom isn't about stockpiling wealth. It's about creating options. It's the freedom to spend time with your loved ones, to pursue hobbies and passions, and to live without the constant shadow of financial stress. When you achieve financial freedom, you break the cycle of working endlessly just to consume, and instead, you take control of your life. Breaking free from the work, consume, die cycle isn't just about fixing your finances, it's about taking control of how you spend your time, energy, and focus. Living intentionally means choosing a life that reflects your values, goals, and desires, rather than letting societal norms or external pressures dictate your path. This shift requires mindfulness in every decision, from how you manage your day to the relationships you nurture. Intentional living begins with mindful decision-making. Every choice you make, no matter how small, has an impact. Are you spending your time on activities that truly enrich your life? Or are you saying yes out of obligation? Are your purchases adding value to your life? Or are they quick fixes for fleeting satisfaction? Intentional living means slowing down and asking yourself these questions regularly. For instance, before committing to an event or purchasing something new, consider whether it aligns with your long-term goals or simply fills a temporary void. This approach allows you to live purposefully instead of reacting to life on autopilot. Equally important is the ability to say no. It might sound simple, but many of us struggle with setting boundaries, whether it's at work, with friends, or even with our consumer habits. Overcommitting to tasks or saying yes to things that don't align with your values can drain your energy and leave little room for personal growth or joy. By learning to say no to unnecessary obligations, overtime hours, or endless scrolling on social media, you create space for activities and people that genuinely matter. Setting these boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-care that ensures your time and energy are spent intentionally. Decluttering is another vital practice for intentional living. Physical clutter, like overstuffed closets and crowded living spaces, can weigh heavily on your mind. Simplifying your environment not only clears the space around you, but also clears mental blocks, allowing you to focus on what truly matters. The same principle applies to mental clutter and less worry, toxic relationships, or self-doubt. Take active steps to remove these from your life, whether it's through meditation, journaling, or seeking professional guidance. A decluttered life fosters creativity, growth, and peace of mind. Intentional living also means redefining success on your own terms. Instead of chasing milestones society deems valuable, focus on creating a life that aligns with your passions and values. Perhaps it's spending more time outdoors, nurturing a hobby, or volunteering in your community. Whatever it may be, living intentionally ensures that your choices reflect who you truly are, not who the world expects you to be. At its heart, intentional living is about reclaiming control over your life. It's a conscious effort to move away from distractions and pressures, choosing instead to live authentically and meaningfully. By doing so, you'll not only escape the cycle but also craft a life filled with purpose, balance, and genuine happiness. A life without purpose can often feel like wandering in a fog, unsure of where to go, what to do, or why it even matters. Breaking free from the work, consume, die cycle becomes much easier when you have a clear sense of purpose guiding your actions and decisions. Your purpose doesn't have to be extraordinary. It simply needs to resonate deeply with you, filling your life with meaning and direction. The journey to finding your purpose starts with self-reflection. Ask yourself, what truly makes you happy? When do you feel most alive? For some, it might be spending time in nature, creating art, or caring for loved ones. For others, it could be teaching, building something with their hands, or making people laugh. Reflect on moments when you felt fulfilled and at peace. They often hold clues about your deeper purpose. Journaling can help here. Writing down your thoughts, memories, and dreams can reveal patterns that point toward what genuinely matters to you. It's also important to distinguish between passion and purpose. Passions are often fleeting, they're the hobbies, interests, or activities that excite you in the moment. Purpose, on the other hand, is rooted in a deeper sense of meaning. For example, you might feel passionate about baking, but your purpose could lie in using that passion to bring people together or create joy for others. Finding your purpose often requires looking beyond surface-level interests to discover how they connect to something bigger. Another way to uncover your purpose is by giving back. Helping others can provide a profound sense of fulfillment and clarity about what matters most to you. Whether it's mentoring someone, volunteering at a local shelter, or supporting a cause you believe in, acts of kindness often align with a greater sense of purpose. When you see the impact you can have on someone else's life, it becomes easier to define your own path. Purpose doesn't have to be tied to a career or a grand vision. It can be as simple as creating a loving and supportive home, sharing your knowledge with others, or contributing to your community. The key is to make it personal and meaningful to you. When you live with purpose, every action feels intentional, and the mundane routines of life start to take on new significance. Living a purposeful life isn't about having all the answers, it's about exploring, experimenting, and staying true to what feels right for you. It's okay for your purpose to evolve over time. What matters is that you're actively seeking it and allowing it to guide your journey. Once you find your purpose, breaking free from the monotony of the cycle becomes not just possible, but inevitable. Breaking free from the work-consume-die cycle is no small feat, and trying to do it alone can feel overwhelming. The truth is, we thrive on connection, and the people around us have a significant influence on how we live our lives. Building a strong support system can make all the difference as you embark on this journey toward intentional and fulfilling living. The first step is finding like-minded individuals. These are the people who share your values, aspirations, or desire to escape the rat race. Joining communities or groups aligned with your goals can provide both inspiration and practical advice. Whether it's a local meetup for minimalists, an online forum for financial independence, or a group of creatives pursuing their passions, being surrounded by individuals who understand your vision can be incredibly empowering. These communities remind you that you're not alone, and they often provide the motivation needed to keep going. Equally important is identifying and cutting out toxic influences. Unfortunately, not everyone in your life will support your decision to break away from societal norms. Some people may criticize your choices or pressure you to stay in the cycle of endless work and consumption. Others might reinforce unhealthy habits or mindsets that hold you back. While it's not always easy to distance yourself from these influences, especially if they're close friends or family, it's crucial to set boundaries and protect your mental and emotional well-being. Remember, your journey isn't about pleasing others. It's about creating a life that feels right for you. Accountability partners are another essential element of a strong support system. Having someone who shares your goals or who believes in your potential can help you stay on track. This could be a close friend, a mentor, or even a coach. Share your plans with them and ask them to check in on your progress. Sometimes, just knowing that someone is rooting for you and holding you accountable can provide the extra push needed to keep moving forward. Beyond just people, a support system can also include resources, tools, or routines that nurture your growth. Books, podcasts, or courses can provide guidance and inspiration, while practices like journaling or meditation can help you stay centered and focused. Surrounding yourself with the right people and influences is like building a safety net that catches you when you stumble and propels you forward when you succeed. A supportive network not only makes the journey more manageable, but also more enjoyable. It's a reminder that while the path to breaking free is deeply personal, it doesn't have to be lonely. Breaking free from the work-consume-die cycle is a bold and rewarding journey, but it's not without its challenges. Many people set out with the best intentions, only to find themselves slipping back into old habits. Recognizing and avoiding common pitfalls can help you stay on track and sustain the changes you've worked so hard to make. One of the most frequent mistakes is overcomplicating the process. It's easy to get overwhelmed by the sheer scope of what breaking free entails: rethinking your finances, redefining success, and changing deeply ingrained habits. Many people try to tackle everything at once, which can lead to burnout and frustration. Instead, focus on small, manageable steps. Start with one aspect of your life, like simplifying your budget or cutting back on unnecessary purchases. Gradually, these small changes will build momentum, making the process feel less daunting and more achievable. Another trap to watch out for is falling for consumerist reinventions of simplicity. Ironically, the desire to live minimally can sometimes lead people into buying products marketed as essential for a minimalist lifestyle. Whether it's a sleek new planner, high-end organizational tools, or trendy eco-friendly gadgets, these items often promise transformation but only serve to reinforce consumer habits. Remember, intentional living isn't about owning the right things. It's about questioning whether you need them at all. Losing motivation is another hurdle many people face. The excitement and determination that fuel the initial stages of the journey can fade over time, especially when progress feels slow. To stay inspired, revisit the reasons why you started. Reflect on how far you've come, even if the steps seem small. Celebrate your wins, whether it's paying off a credit card, spending a week without impulsive purchases, or carving out more time for loved ones. Regularly remind yourself of your bigger vision and the freedom you're working toward. It's also essential to let go of the idea of perfection. Breaking free from this cycle isn't about living a flawless, idealized life. It's about progress and growth. There will be setbacks, moments of doubt, or even times when you slip back into old patterns. That's okay. What matters is recognizing these moments and course-correcting without being overly hard on yourself. By understanding these pitfalls and actively working to avoid them, you set yourself up for long-term success. The journey might not always be smooth, but each step forward, no matter how small, is a victory in reclaiming your life. When I first noticed that my life revolved around working, consuming, and repeating the same pattern every day, I felt trapped and exhausted. I had a well-paying job that demanded 60-hour weeks, and I convinced myself that the long hours and constant hustle were worth it. To cope with the stress, I indulged in expensive meals, impulse purchases, and the latest gadgets under the guise of treating myself. Yet, no matter how much I spent, there was an emptiness I couldn't shake. The breaking point came one quiet evening when I sat alone in my apartment, surrounded by things I thought would make me happy. My latest purchasey designer chair looked perfect in my living room, but I couldn't stop asking myself, is this it? Is this what I've been working so hard for? That moment of clarity hit me like a ton of bricks. Despite my possessions and achievements, I felt drained, unfulfilled, and disconnected from my deeper self. I decided it was time to confront the tough questions I had been avoiding for so long. I asked myself, what do I truly want from life? Why am I stuck, and what's holding me back? The answers weren't pretty. I realized I had tied my self-worth to external validation, success at work, approval from peers, and possessions that showcased my status. I was living a life dictated by societal expectations, not by what actually made me happy. That was the moment I began to change. The first thing I did was to embrace minimalist principles. I started decluttering my life, and not just physically but emotionally and financially as well. I let go of items that didn't add real value to my life, and began focusing on experiences and relationships that brought me genuine joy. I also created a savings plan to build financial freedom. Instead of spending on short-lived pleasures, I prioritized investing in my future and security. Another major shift was exploring work that aligned with my passions. I transitioned out of the high-stress job that drained me and started pursuing projects that I genuinely enjoyed. It wasn't easy. It meant a temporary pay cut and stepping out of my comfort zone, but the freedom and satisfaction I gained were worth every challenge. Today, my life looks completely different. I wake up excited, knowing that my time and energy are spent on things that truly matter to me. I've learned to appreciate simple joys like a morning walk, a meaningful conversation, or pursuing a creative hobby. My days are no longer dictated by what I should do or buy. They're guided by what feels purposeful and fulfilling. If you're feeling stuck in the same cycle, know that change is possible. It's not an overnight transformation, and it requires courage, self-reflection, and effort. But trust me, breaking free is the most rewarding thing you'll ever do. The journey toward a more intentional, fulfilling life is worth it. And if I can do it, so can you. If this message resonated with you, Take the first step toward creating a more intentional and meaningful life today. Hit the like button, subscribe for more content like this, and drop a comment below. What's one thing you're ready to change to break free from the cycle? Be sure to check the description for helpful links to resources, books, and tools that can guide you on this journey. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch and reflect. I hope this inspired you to rethink what success and freedom mean to you. Remember, this isn't about rejecting work or money, it's about finding balance and living with intention. Stay tuned for my next video, where we'll explore practical strategies to simplify your life and focus on what truly matters. Until then, take care and keep moving toward the life you deserve. See you soon.